needs to be mandated, as the Liberals do not do it on their own. Repay the grants, and if there is availability, a penalty, either monetary or not being able to submit for contracts for a time specified, or both. Keith and Lisa from Owen Sound, absolutely yes to this question. If the Liberal government has nothing to hide, they would turn the documents over. As taxpayers, we have the right to know how and where our money is being spent. I would also agree that the Liberal insiders who receive this money should pay it back. The current Liberal government has lacked transparency for quite some time on a number of issues. I appreciate the opportunity to share my voice in this matter. Dave, yes, all papers must be handed over unredacted and all money must be returned. This corruption must stop. Vicky from Barrow Bay. In a nutshell, I'll keep it simple. In this household, we are tired of the corruption. We're tired of the Liberals playing silly games for their benefit. We need to find the truth. We want accountability, and if there are criminal charges involved, people should be charged. I will leave you to articulate in a matter of which you need to, but enough is enough. I've been following this situation in the independent media fairly closely. Thank you for the extensive transcripts. Lorraine from West Grey, yes, I am disappointed that the word redacted did not appear in the motion. I'm also disappointed this measure has not been implemented by the people via our representations in the House of Commons concerning other scandals we have seen in this government. To fail to produce or only produce heavily redacted documents. My position is that we should turn over the documents to the law clerk and the RCMP. It is every citizen's duty, if they are aware of a possible illegal activity, to report it with or without documentation to the police. The House of Commons is acting on behalf of the Canadian citizens and are engaged in the same process that we are all to consider doing. Yes, I'm a firm believer in restitution and the application of justice where possible. Money can be requested in this situation, I believe. It would be part of a just decision. It would also help Canadians regain some trust in the justice system and in the government. Ingrid, should the Liberal government turn over the SDC's documents to the RCMP for the criminal investigation and comply with the will of Parliament? Absolutely and immediately. And what other business can an employer refuse to comply with the management's order? If the Liberal government refuses to immediately hand over the requested information, this information should be seized by whatever force necessary by the RCMP or another appropriate agency. Those refusing to cooperate should immediately be released from their positions due to ethical, if not criminal, breaches. Why are we tolerating such corruption and insolence on the part of officials who are elected by the people and for the people? I know I'm running out of time, Mr. Speaker. Mel from Owen Sound. Absolutely, the Liberals need to hand over the documents and any wrongdoers need to be held accountable and to repay the money. From Paul in Grey County, Liberals are working against Canadian citizens and the RCMP has a duty to investigate all the crimes and charge them. They also have to repay all the illegitimate money back. From Garnet, this government is corrupt and the people of Canada must remove them from power before our country becomes a totalitarian entity and democracy is dead. Please continue to bring attention to this kind of corruption and waste of our tax dollars. I'm not very proud of our country under the Liberal regime. We're in danger of becoming a banana republic and it's too cold to even grow bananas here in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Speaker. That last one, do thank my honourable colleague from Bruce Grey Owen Sound for the banana republic without benefit of fruit. It's a good one. First of all, I wanted to thank the honourable member because we don't usually get a chance to exchange with each other on Hansard, and I just want to thank him from the bottom of my heart for the work that we and a number of other MPs have been doing together to try to do the right thing by former members of the Afghan Parliament who were women who are now on the run for their lives and have been. And the honourable member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound is just one of the finest people I've ever had the privilege to work with. I just would ask him if there's any way that he can see that we can just get this to committee faster. Yes, it would go faster if the government sent all the documents, but we surely have enough now, given the Auditor General's report and the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development Auditor report, to actually drill down, call witnesses, and get to work in committee. And I asked him if he thinks that there'd be a way to compromise on this motion.
The honourable member from Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
I'd like to thank the member for her kind words, and my kudos back to her and the other four members that worked that we all work together to help these former Afghan women MPs. It was an important cause that we all believed in, and there is power when we can come to a consensus sometimes on things going forward. To get to the crux of her question, I don't know if I can, I'm not aware of any other way to get this resolved quickly unless the government turns over those documents. And the second aspect of that is because, and I know she believes in this wholeheartedly too, this is only the first time I got to speak to this motion. I had 450 constituents that provided me feedback in less than 2 days. I'm sure that when I look around this room, this chamber, there's lots of other colleagues that would like the opportunity to speak to this and very important issue that their constituents care about. We need to end the corruption.
The honourable member from St. John Rothsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member opposite for his speech. But, Mr. Speaker, I came from my riding of St. John Rothsey to Ottawa to do work on behalf of Canadians. And we have literally been tied up and not doing work on behalf of Canadians for the better part of 2 weeks now. And, Mr. Speaker, my riding is asking me why we aren't getting to work on behalf of all Canadians. The member opposite, I'm also here, Mr. Speaker, to talk about dental care, pharmacare, great initiatives that we're doing. But, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite talked about silly games, and I'm asking him when the Conservatives are going to stop the silly games and let us get back to work on behalf of all Canadians. Thank you.
The honourable member from Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't speak. I mean, I've sat on committee with the other member briefly in the past. I actually think there's lots of work getting done in the committees. I get lots of work done every day here in Ottawa when I'm here. The reason we're not getting any further debate or issues dealt with in government business is wholeheartedly because the government refuses to comply with your order. This could all be over tomorrow if the government would just turn over the documents. And as I said, if you would have listened to my response to the previous question that I had, I think it's our right, it's our privilege to answer questions or to speak on behalf of our constituents and contribute to the debate. And this is the first time I've had a chance to actually give a speech on this very important matter of privilege.
Then I have
The honourable member for.
député de Rimouski.
The member for Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, Les Basques. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, the motto of Quebecers, I have that motto in mind right now, but I'd like my colleague to keep that in mind this morning. The colleague covered liberal corruption, lack of transparency. Well, I'd like to remind him of our history because it's important to remember our history. The Conservative government, the Conservatives, they call themselves the common sense Conservatives. They say that they stand against corruption in this world, but when they formed government, there was misuse of public money as well. For example, there was an issue during the G8. $50 million. So his government also refused to hand over documents. There was the scandal of the transfer of Afghan prisoners. There's the robocall scandal, the omnibus budget bill with C-38 in 2012. Here's my question. With such a terrible track record, how can Quebecers have confidence in a potential future Conservative government? The honourable member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
We have to move to statements by members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, I don't support or stand for corruption ever. I was not part of a former Conservative government. I will not speak to and cannot speak to any corruption. The member listed, and so I don't have the background knowledge to speak to every single case. The Afghan detainee file is one, though, that I will speak to. That wasn't a case of corruption. There was allegations. There was parliamentary debate. An ad hoc committee was formed. In the end, thousands, tens of thousands of documents, or pages anyway, were reviewed by members across different parties. And guess what they found? Nothing. This isn't the case here. This is a case right now that we're dealing with of $390 million being of taxpayers' money that's been spent improperly. Conflict, 186 conflicts.
Hate to member from Bruce Gray Owen Sound, but he will have 3 minutes and about 30 seconds left in questions and comments when this question of privilege debate resumes. Statements by members, déclaration de député, the honourable member from Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, I am very concerned by attacks on journalists who report on Khalistani extremism in Canada. Few days back, Rishi Nagar of Red FM Calgary was severely attacked. In March 2023, Samir Kaushal of Radio AM 600 Richmond, BC, was assaulted for covering a Khalistan protest. In February 2022, Brampton radio host Deepak Punj was attacked in his studio for criticizing Khalistan-related violence. Anti-terrorism investigative journalist Mocha Bazargan has received death threats for his fearless reporting on Khalistani extremism. There are many more attacks in Greater Toronto Area and across Canada by Khalistani extremists. I call on law enforcement agencies to take notice of Khalistani extremism with all seriousness it deserves. It has to be dealt with an iron hand before it is too late. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Chatham-Kent Leamington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to shed a public spotlight on what Canadians are already feeling in their wallets. The food professor, Sylvain Charlebois of Dalhousie University, has forecast that the inflationary pressures, including the carbon tax on the growing, processing and transporting of food, will increase the cost of wholesale food to Canadians by 34% by 2025. Food affordability is becoming out of the reach for many Canadians, while our U.S. counterparts are paying 36.8% less for wholesale food. Why? Well, here could be the reason. This week, Canada's budget watchdog confirmed that the carbon tax will cost Ontario families another $903, in part due to the rising carbon tax on food. Canadian parents should not have to choose between feeding their kids a bag of chips or a veggie tray. Costs go up, time's up. When will this government axe the tax and restore Canada to a nation where healthy food is not a luxury?
The honourable member from Ottawa West Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of three unique international development organizations: the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation, and the Saskatchewan Council for International Cooperation.
For 5 decades, these councils have been more than just partners in international development. They've been the architects of change, mobilizing youth, training educators, and strengthening civil society to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges.
Have benefited from their work, whether it's using music therapy for healing, solar-powered breast pumps, or digital education. Their innovative programs are changing lives. And through their work, so many Canadians have been informed, inspired, and involved in creating a more just and equitable world. I wish them a happy 50th anniversary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Rosemont, la petite patrie.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the Liberals promised major reforms to EI, better access for all, accommodations for seasonal workers, and for the self-employed. 9 years later, nothing's been done. Once again, the Liberals have dragged and let workers down. That's why a historic coalition has formed, including unions, homeless associations, and so on. They've gathered to demand the expected changes which affect everyone, especially women. If a person can lose access to regular benefits if they've been on maternity leave, for example. Will the Liberals finally take action to protect the rights of these women workers? The honourable member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. the Mental Illness Awareness Week reminds us that everyone with a mental illness is unique. This morning, we launched a call for tenders for a fund that will provide $150 million to help communities and municipalities and Indigenous organizations rapidly respond to urgent needs in dealing with the toxic drug crisis and overdose crisis. The frontline workers are dedicated and making a real difference all across the country. There is no universal cookie-cutter approach, and no community can solve this problem alone. We're determined to do everything we can with all our partners and communities in order to save lives.
Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
It's Thanksgiving, a time to count our blessings, and as Canadians, we're blessed every day by the hardworking people our country relies on. The men and women, our Canadian forces, police, paramedics, and firefighters who protect us, those who build our country, power linemen, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, mechanics, oil field workers, loggers, truckers, plant and factory workers, the quiet but vital work of restaurant servers and checkout clerks, and of course our farmers who grow our food and feed millions around the world. We promise these extraordinary Canadians that a common sense conservative government will restore the promise of Canada, a Canada where you can afford to eat, have a decent home, live in a safe neighborhood, and retire comfortably. This Thanksgiving, we continue our fight to give Canadians a carbon tax election that will bring relief from high taxes, high costs, high crime, and a corrupt Liberal government. Let's bring it home.
The honourable member from St. John's Rothsay.
Mr. Speaker, we are all privileged to be here in this House, to have a seat, and to be representing our constituents, doing what they elected us to do. As we all know, but perhaps the public does not, is that we could not do our jobs well without having the backing and support of our amazing teams. The people who help answer the thousands of emails, the ones who answer the many calls, and sometimes have to deliver hard news and have hard conversations. They are on the front lines and are working hard for us and Canadians every day. I've been extremely fortunate to have amazing people with me throughout my journey. I want to give my thanks and respect to Jim Hennessy, Ashley Lloyd, and Jeanette McLaughlin, who has been with me since 2015. Thank you for all you do. I couldn't do it without you. And I want to thank all members in this House and encourage you all to thank your wonderful staff for the important work we do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Ottawa Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. This week I had the pleasure of meeting with Lupus Canada and their team of doctors and patient advocates to speak about the ongoing challenges faced by the 1 in 1,000 Canadians who are living with lupus, often referred to as a disease. The complexity of this autoimmune condition and its various symptoms make diagnosing it a lengthy and challenging process, currently taking 7 years on average. Canadians living with lupus face many challenges with navigating the disease due to its episodic nature. While advancements have been made in the treatment and management, there is still much work to do. I want to thank Lupus Canada and their team for their dedication and advocacy in supporting all Canadians, and especially those living with lupus. Thank you, Speaker.
Hear, hear. The honourable member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
1 in 8 Canadian women will develop breast cancer during their lifetime, and 1 in 36 will die from it. There are many factors that can increase a woman's risk for breast cancer, including family history, genetics, and breast density. Racialized women are more likely to develop cancer at a younger age, and Black women are 40% more likely to die from it. The Canadian Cancer Society, Dense Breast Canada, Breast Cancer Canada, and the Canadian Association of Radiologists are all calling for the Canadian Task Force on Preventative Health to revise their guidelines on breast cancer screening to start before age 50. They want screening to start at age 40 and extend beyond 75, yet the Liberal Minister of Health refuses to overturn these out-of-date federal guidelines, putting women's lives at risk. We know early detection and treatment saves lives. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer at 48 years old and died less than a year later. To all the women, if you've been putting it off, please talk to your doctor or book a mammogram today. To everyone out there in a battle with cancer, know that we are all cheering you on.
Hear, hear. The honourable member from Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. September marked Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, and each year over 3,000 women in Canada are diagnosed with ovarian cancer, whereas the 5-year survival rate for breast cancer in Canada is now up to 88%. Ovarian cancer is still as low as 44%. Bells with Balls, Newfoundland and Labrador, and Ovarian Cancer Canada held the first Lady Ball in Newfoundland and Labrador, engaging survivors and thrivers and many female role models from across our province to support ovarian cancer research and awareness. Raising over $100,000, the event was coordinated by the incredible co-chairs of Bonnie Morgan and Alana Walsh-Giovanni. And I want to thank all of those generous sponsors and attendees that come out that made it an exciting evening. Together, we are making a real difference in the fight against ovarian cancer, turning hope into action for a brighter future for all women and their families.
The honourable member from Yellowhead.
The investigation into the Jasper wildfire has exposed shocking negligence from this radical environment minister. Since 2017, forester Ken Hodges warned that if deadwood wasn't removed, Jasper would burn. His warnings were ignored, and he testified that what little was done was insignificant and poorly thought out. We've also learned that senior officials discussed canceling prescribed burns for political optics. It was reported that firefighters and fire trucks were turned away at the gates while Jasper Park burned. Fire hydrants didn't match those used anywhere else in Alberta, making firefighting even harder. The Alberta government's response was delayed by federal bureaucracy when every minute counted. With a third of the town destroyed, 2,000 people left homeless, and nearly $1 billion in damage, this devastation is the direct result of the minister's failure to protect the people and the town of Jasper.
The honourable member from Central Okanagan, Similkameen, Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, after another week of a paralysed Parliament, a $400 million Liberal scandal is proof that this NDP Liberal government is not worth the cost, crime and corruption. You have ruled that this NDP Liberal government has violated a House of Commons order to turn over evidence to the RCMP for a criminal investigation into the scandal. This government's refusal to respect your ruling has paralysed Parliament, casting aside issues that Canadians sent us here to address, such as the doubling of housing costs, food inflation, crime, and chaos. At issue is the Auditor General's investigation, which uncovered more than 186 conflicts of interest at Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Liberal appointees directed over $400 million in taxpayer funds to their own companies. This occurred while many Canadians struggled to afford basic necessities like food, heating, and housing. Mr. Speaker, we have to ask, what is in these documents that the government is so desperate to hide? What is so egregious that they're willing to paralyze this House for weeks? We need accountability, Mr. Speaker. We'll keep demanding it.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Argenteuil-La Petite Nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to pay tribute today to Mr. Hubert Pilon, a resident of La Chute in my riding of Argenteuil-La Petite Nation. Last spring, Mr. Pilon was awarded the Lieutenant Governor of Quebec's medal in recognition of his many commitments and achievements. An engineer by trade, Mr. Pilon has been involved in his community at all levels, both in the municipality and in community organizations, including the Argenteuil Hospital Foundation. An example of dedication to community, he's been involved with the Lachute Lions Club for over 50 years. He was also awarded the Centennial Medal in 2023 in recognition of his many years of service. Hubert, I'd like to thank you for all you do for the community. You're a role model, and we're proud of everything you've accomplished.
The honourable member from Vancouver, Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, as NDP finance critic, I know that small and medium-sized businesses are the real engine of our economy. From coast to coast, these enterprises employ millions of Canadians and contribute essential goods, services, and benefits to every community in our nation. They are responsible for 50% of Canada's GDP, employ 65% of all workers, and create the majority of new jobs every year. But we know that many businesses are struggling with high rents, rising costs, and difficulty retaining employees. When individuals and families have to tighten their belts, local businesses suffer as well.
This week I met with representatives of Canada's Business Improvement Associations. These wonderful organizations promote local businesses and play active roles in all kinds of community activities. I want to acknowledge two superb BIAs in Vancouver Kingsway, the Collingwood BIA, led by Angela Evans, and the Victoria Drive BIA, chaired by Christopher Chung. Their hard work not only creates prosperity, but it brings us all closer together.
I'm going to have
the honourable member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-Les-Basques. Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to honour the memory of an exceptional man and a proud lower shoreman, Mr. Thomas Gagnon, who tragically passed away on September 14th at the age of 72. A successful entrepreneur, he founded PG Solutions in Rimouski in 1980, a Quebec flagship specializing in management software applications, making a significant contribution to corporate forestry and municipal environments throughout Quebec. Then in 2012, he and his son co-founded KOA Bas-Saint-Laurent. Over the years, this superbly located campground has won 2 Quebec Campsite of the Year awards, the title of Canada's 3rd largest camping destination, and multiple North American awards, all of which have helped put Saint-Mathieu-de-Rieux on the map as a popular destination for vacationers. To the visionary father and friend he was, I take my hat off. The light of your work will continue to shine among us. Goodbye, Thomas. Thank you for everything.
the honourable member from Red Deer, Mountain View.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Yesterday, the Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed yet again that the carbon tax costs Canadians more than they get back in rebates. When the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax, families in Alberta will pay nearly $2,000. And it's not just Albertans that are fed up. All 10 provinces are now opposed to the costly coalition's carbon tax. The government will point to this very same report and talk about how great their rebate is, but ignore the report's findings that show the average Canadian household will see a net loss. When it comes to this government's narrative on its economy-crippling carbon tax, the jig is up too. The carbon tax is driving up the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating. Neither this NDP Liberal government nor their carbon tax is worth the cost. Canadians from coast to coast are ready for this Prime Minister to call a carbon tax election.
The honourable member from Niagara Centre.
Speaker, day in and day out, airports across Canada go above and beyond to ensure the safe and secure travel of passengers. Our airports not only help Canadians reunite with loved ones, visit family and go on vacation, but they also support our economy in vital ways. With over 200,000 direct airport employees across the country, they play a critical role in strengthening our supply chains and fostering national growth. Mr. Speaker, I would like to extend my gratitude to the airport authorities who were with us in Ottawa this past week for their hard work as well as their dedication. We continue to recognize and appreciate, Mr. Speaker, the significant impact that airports and their workers have on our communities from coast to coast to coast to coast. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions, questions orales. The honourable member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes up, costs up, crimes up, and time is up on the Prime Minister's costly carbon tax. And yesterday, once again, the Parliamentary Budget Officer reaffirmed again that Canadians are out when it comes to the tax. If you add up their 2 carbon taxes, and of course they tax the tax with GST, it will cost households anywhere between $900 to $2,000 per year. So if the government is so sure of their plan to quadruple the carbon tax, why would they let Canadians decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday was indeed a momentous day for Canada because yesterday the Pharmacare Bill became law in this country. This means hope for 12 million Canadians, Mr. Speaker, for those affected by diabetes, for women struggling with the cost of contraception. Help is now on the way. For the first time ever in Canadian history, the Government of Canada will be helping to bring down the cost of medication, helping Canadians with their affordability. Mr. Speaker, it's a historic day which we should all celebrate in this place.
The honourable member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
What is happening in this country is nothing to celebrate. For the first time in this country, we have 2 million visits to food banks per month. That's 24 million visits, record-shattering in this country. We have thousands of encampments that have popped up in every part of the country. There are children struggling to get meals. 1 in 4 are skipping meals because of the carbon tax and their plan to quadruple it. At the end of the day, this is no coincidence, Mr. Speaker. It's because they keep driving up the carbon tax. When can we just have a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide on the future to axe the tax?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, a few days before Thanksgiving, I think all of us have tremendous compassion for all Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet. But on this side of the House, we know that the best guarantee of a good life for a family is a good job. And that's why we want to celebrate the fact that we learned this morning that in September, Canada added 47,000 new jobs. Unemployment fell, and every single one of those new jobs, Mr. Speaker, was a sector.
Hear, hear. The honourable member from Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
Well, yesterday's report from Stats Canada was nothing to celebrate. That confirmed that income inequality after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government has never been higher. The gap increased by 50% between the richest and poorest Canadians, the highest it's ever been on record. And after 9 years, when this Prime Minister promised to help the middle class and those working hard to join it, there are now millions of Canadians that will never be able to join the middle class because of their ever-increasing taxes like the carbon tax. Why can't we have a carbon tax election for Canadians to decide if they want to quadruple the carbon tax or axe it entirely?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the only party in this House that voted against tax fairness has a lot of gall getting up and talking about income inequality. We are the party that fights every single day for the middle class. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that part of the jobs news we had today was wages. Wages have now outpaced inflation for 20 months in a row.
Hear, hear.
A good job and a good wage, that is a recipe for middle-class success in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois supported the Liberals in their inflationary spending spree almost 200 times. Quebecers are turning to food banks. Ordinary people are facing homelessness, grandparents unable to pay their rent, students having to sleep in homeless shelters. It costs $1,743 a month to rent a one-bedroom in Montreal. This country needs more competence, and Conservatives are ready to set things straight. Will the government give Canadians a choice and call an election? The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, we are pleased about the great news my colleague has shared this morning. Pharmacare is now the law in Canada. Joblessness is now rapidly declining and wages are up. The only thing declining is the number of public servants that will be needed to make Conservative cuts. The Conservatives should be transparent, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins-Lévis. The Bloc Québécois isn't exactly boasting about supporting the Liberal government almost 200 times, Mr. Speaker. The government that has centralized power more than any in history. This government spends without scruples. It drove up inflation. In Montreal, you need to earn $59,000 to rent a one-bedroom. At Thanksgiving, Canadians won't even be able to cook their traditional meals. This government's incompetence is intolerable. Will the government finally give a gift to Canadians and call elections? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague, whom I greatly respect, spoke about what is intolerable. Well, what is intolerable is hearing the Conservative leader talk about the difficulties faced by Quebecers while at the same time saying that he will hurt them and punish them by cutting the services they need. This includes funding for the school food program. Will my colleague advise her leader to actually meet with teachers and tell them that feeding students is liberal bureaucracy? The honourable member for Saint-Jean. Yesterday, farmers from all over came to Ottawa to support Bloc Québécois Bill C-282 on supply management, which is being held up in the Senate. All the parties were there to call on two senators, Peter Beam and Peter Harder, to stop holding up the will of the people's house. Everyone was there except one person who still has not spoken up on this file. That person is the Prime Minister. Yet he is the one who personally appointed the two great noblemen who are holding everything up. When will the Prime Minister finally call on his two appointees to stop holding up democracy? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there's one thing on which the Bloc Québécois and the Liberal Party agree, it's the need to protect supply management. We have explained this over and over. Since 2015, we have decided to appoint independent senators. But there were senators appointed before that. Conservative appointees are not independent. We saw this Wednesday morning when they attended the Conservative caucus. Will the Conservative leader call on his senators to vote to protect the supply management system? Order. The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean, for Saint-Jean. The Prime Minister didn't only appoint the two senators who are holding up the bill, he has a privileged relationship with Peter Harder. Senator Harder even brags about it on his website. Harder advised the Prime Minister when the Liberals were in opposition in 2015, and the Prime Minister personally would pick up the phone and call him. The Prime Minister even tasked Mr. Harder with planning the transition to a Liberal government 6 months before appointing him senator. If the Prime Minister has Senator Harder's phone number, why won't he use it to tell him to stop holding up democracy? The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois doesn't seem interested in the files anymore. Remind them that yesterday I celebrated Thanksgiving with residents from Lagap in my riding of Gatineau. Those people told me, Mr. McKinnon, we have signed up for the Canadian Dental Care Plan. They wonder why the Bloc is putting hundreds of millions of dollars at risk. I would just like to remind members that it is important not to use individual names, even if they are referring to themselves. The honourable member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, a new report shows that the cost of living is increasing faster than income is for the 40% poorest households in Canada. That means that almost half of Canadians are growing poorer. People are struggling while the rich are stuffing their pockets. Conservatives have announced that they will be cutting programs that help people like dental care and pharmacare. Programs that owe their existence to the NDP. The two largest parties are costing the population dearly. What will it take for the Liberals to stop kowtowing to wealthy CEOs at the expense of Quebecers? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we agree that dental care is very helpful to Quebecers and Canadians. Something else that helps them is having a good job with a good wage. And that is why today we are very happy that in September the Canadian economy added 47,000 new jobs, and for 20 months now, wages have been increasing faster than inflation. That is a good piece of news for all Canadians.
Vancouver Kingsway.
A new report paints a disturbing picture of economic injustice in Canada. Income inequality has hit the highest level ever recorded, and the bottom 40% of Canadians hold less than 3% of Canada's wealth. The Liberals let this happen, caving to wealthy CEOs jacking up grocery prices and rent, while the Conservatives want to cut programs like the NDP's pharmacare and dental care that will put more money in people's pockets. Why are the Liberals, like Conservatives, catering to the ultra-rich while working families in Canada are falling behind?
Good question.
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I have tremendous respect for the member from Vancouver Kingsway, whom I have known for many years and with whom I have worked constructively for many years. I share his concern about income inequality, and that's why I know that he shares my happiness at the jobs numbers that we got this morning. The fact that we have 47,000 more jobs added to the Canadian economy in September, the fact that wages have outpaced inflation for 20 months in a row, and as an added bonus, rents have been going down in Vancouver.
Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Parliament's budget watchdog has confirmed yet again that Canadians pay more in carbon tax than they get back in so-called rebates. In Ontario, for example, a family will pay $1,400 more than they get back. But they already knew that because everything costs more after 9 years of these NDP Liberals. Taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up for their economic vandalism that they're perpetrating on Canadians. So why won't this Prime Minister just put Canadians in the place where they need to be with a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't read the report. It's obvious, because on page 1 of the report, it says right here that Canadians will see a net gain, receiving more from the Canada carbon rebate than the total amount they pay in the federal fuel charge. Mr. Speaker, just flip to page 7. It's a bit long. I know the Member of Parliament might have a bit of a difficult time with a document like this, but the meaningless slogans don't matter. What does matter is that, broadly speaking, our updated estimates show larger net gains for average households right across income quintiles in backstop provinces compared to the previous distributional analysis. If he's going to quote the book, Mr. Speaker, he ought to read it. It's right here. I can bring it over if you'd like. Page 1.
Just going to ensure that we, of course, treat all members with the respect and dignity that all members deserve. The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, not only did I read the report, I actually paid some attention when I dressed myself this morning, unlike that scene over there.
The Honourable Member knows that order. Honourable Member from Milton will take a seat. Colleagues, I've mentioned this before in question period that it's inappropriate to comment on the looks of any member, and so I do point that out. So I'll invite the Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes to start his question again without the comments which the Speaker has risen to his feet for.
Speaker, not only did I read the report, I was able to make it past the first page, all the way to page 19 of the PBO's report that shows the true cost of the carbon tax for Ontario families, that it's going to be $1,400 more than they're getting back in their phony rebates. And Statistics Canada today revealed the full effect of the economic vandalism. All of these high taxes and economic wealth redistribution were supposed to make Canadians better off, they claimed, but instead we've seen the largest gap between the rich and poor that's ever existed in this country. It's time for a carbon tax election. Why won't they just give us one?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I know that this is Friday, and I know that Conservatives just cannot resist every day seeking to plumb new depths of degraded nursery playground insults. But I have some advice for the member opposite. If he wants to insult a colleague for his appearance, never a good idea, maybe don't pick a gold medal winning Olympic athlete.
Order. Order. The honourable member from Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time's up. This week, the Parliamentary Budget Officer once again reported that the carbon tax costs more per family than families get back in rebates. In Alberta, the carbon tax will cost nearly $2,000 by driving up the cost of gas, home heating and groceries, and nearly everything else. All 10 provinces don't like it, and Canadians don't like it. So when will the government call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know how you can tell that the Conservatives know they're losing the argument? Is when they resort to useless, meaningless, ad hominem attacks on people's appearance. That is unnecessary, unparliamentary, and childish. It's childish just like their slogans, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to cheer on Canada's economy. They don't want to acknowledge that 47,000 jobs were added in September. They don't want to acknowledge that interest rates are down because inflation is down, and gas prices are down, and unemployment is down. And Mr. Speaker, the best part is our emissions are down too, because our plan is working. Canadians are working hard, and our economy is working for them.
The honourable member from Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, I asked him a polite question and he didn't answer it, so I'm not sure what that response was about. I'll ask again and point out, though, that the PBO report couldn't have been more clear. It's right there on page 19 and page 3. That's where the PBO says that Canadians pay more in the carbon tax and GST on the carbon tax than they get in rebates. The carbon tax drives up the cost of gas, heating, and groceries. It kills jobs. It suppresses wages by chasing investment out of Canada. But he doesn't have to agree with me, Mr. Speaker. His government can call a carbon tax election, and we'll see what Canadians have to say. When will they do it?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the carbon price is this simple. It brings down pollution and it puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians. It is the single best mechanism known to the market to reduce carbon footprints. In fact, it was a Conservative invention, but their opposition to it is unsurprising. What is surprising is the complete flip-flop on this position that we've seen from the NDP. When you flip on your principles and abandon supporting carbon pricing, you breed voter cynicism and you send one message to progressive voters. That is that if you want somebody to defend climate action and support attacking pollution, your only option is the Liberal Party of Canada.
The honourable member from Yorkton Melville.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and this government's time is up. Once again, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed the carbon tax costs Canadians more than they get back. Saskatchewan families will pay more than $2,000 when this costly coalition quadruples the carbon tax. The Prime Minister knows Canadians have had enough of him, taxing them to death while robbing them blind. When will he call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only place in the world where it seems like it's okay to never talk about climate change, commit to doing nothing about climate change, and commit to actually increasing our carbon emissions seems to be the Conservative campaign room. Because, Mr. Speaker, the world knows that climate change is real. We just had this horrific hurricane sweep across Florida, one of the most powerful ever. Wildfires are forcing Canadians out of their homes. And yes, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives want to say, how is the carbon price going to reduce hurricanes and forest fires? Mr. Speaker, it's science. They need to go back to literally grade 9 science. Greenhouse gases cause extreme weather.
The honourable member from Yorkton Melville.
Mr. Speaker, how terrible that member is willing to use a narrative that is false when it comes to Jasper, just to make his point that is not accurate. The PBO has confirmed again what Canadians from all 10 provinces know. The carbon tax continues to drive up the cost of gas, groceries, and heating, and that is only the thin edge of the wedge. Middle-class Canadians are losing ground. Those wishing to join the middle class have no confidence in this NDP Liberal costly coalition. The Prime Minister knows he's taxing Canadians to death and robbing them blind. When will he call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, the blatant climate denial from the other side is absurd and childish. Mr. Speaker, it's literally in grade 3 where kids learn about greenhouse gases. The more you put into the environment, the hotter our planet gets. The hotter our planet gets, the hotter the oceans become. And yeah, that causes more extreme weather. And it also dries out our forests, which makes our forests more susceptible and vulnerable to wildfires. Mr. Speaker, over 40% of the people around the world who were forced out of their homes because of wildfires last year were Canadian. We're a small country, 0.5% of the world's population. Climate change is real. When will these Conservatives get it?
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, Peter Beam and Peter Harder, two senators, want to overturn the House of Commons vote on C-282, which would protect the supply management system in trade talks. These two Liberal appointees are worried that it would take powers away from trade negotiators. That's actually the point. That's the point of the bill. It would prevent trade negotiators from selling off supply management like they did 3 times in a row. In talks with Europe, Asia, and the United States, we protect our farmers, they protect the right to throw them under the bus. Will the Liberals tell their buddies that they've got it all backwards? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's it. We've explained this over and over. We appoint senators who are independent. I'm sure that the Bloc understands the concept. We are calling on senators to act. We are telling them that the bill is supported by the overwhelming majority of parliamentarians. We call on them to act diligently and send the bill back to us as soon as possible. I hope I have been clear. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. The Peters were trade negotiators back in the past. I guess that's why, instead of protecting farmers, they're protecting trade negotiators. They privilege people like themselves at the expense of the common good, democracy, and our farmers. That's what the Senate is all about. It's an archaic monarchical institution. This is what happens when you give big salaries to people who are completely unaccountable. They start thinking they're more important than everyone else. Will their Liberals call on their majesties to come on down from on high and defend our farmers? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2015, we have appointed independent senators, but senators appointed before that by the Harper government are not independent. They go to caucus on Wednesday morning to get orders from the Conservative leaders. So I would ask Quebec's Conservatives a question. Are you putting pressure on your senators to ensure they will vote in favour of this bill? Order. The member for Ottawa South Orleans will come to order. We do not speak when we are not recognized by the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, time is up for this Liberal carbon tax grab. New data confirms that Alberta families will be worse off by nearly $2,000 after the carbon tax is quadrupled. That's money coming out of Alberta into government pockets to pay off the Liberal insiders. Will the Prime Minister apologize for the public smearing of the independent budget officer for telling the truth? And finally call the carbon tax election. Let's go.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, but it's just on page 1. The Conservatives clearly didn't get past the table of contents. It says clearly, PBO estimates that the average household in each backstop province will see a net gain, receiving more from the Canada Carbon Rebate than the total amount that they pay in the federal carbon charge. Mr. Speaker, October 15th is next week, and that's when Canadians will receive their next installment of the Canada Carbon Rebate, and that's good news because it's supporting their affordability. Speaker, interest rates are down, inflation is down, emissions are down. This plan is working. When will the Conservatives get it?
The Honourable Member from Regina, Wisconsin.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up, and the carbon tax is way up. Yesterday, the Parliamentary Budget Officer released an updated carbon tax report that shows that once the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax, Saskatchewan families will be paying $2,000 per year. Mr. Speaker, when will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide if they want to continue to pay his carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just a reminder to the constituents in my colleagues' riding in Saskatchewan, they'll be receiving $376 on October the 15th for a family of 4. And that's good news for affordability, Mr. Speaker, because 8 out of 10 families across Canada get more back for the Canada carbon rebate than they pay. But it seems like the Conservatives don't want to talk about the economy anymore. And it's probably because Canada's economy is doing really, really well. We added 47,000 jobs in September alone. Interest rates are down because inflation is down. Gas prices are down and emissions are down, Mr. Speaker. But the Conservatives don't want good news. They don't want to cheer for Canadians. They just want bad news stories.
The Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years as Liberal NDP government, they are not worth the corporate crime and corruption. TD Bank has been ordered to pay over $3 billion. That's $3 billion by U.S. regulators because they've been found to be in conspiracy to violate the Banker Secrecy Act and commit money laundering for criminals who traffic in drugs that end up on our streets. Mr. Speaker, simple question for the government: when will they take laundering seriously?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I do want to thank the member opposite for this serious and important question, and I want to wish him and his beautiful family a wonderful Thanksgiving. We do take money laundering very seriously. That is why we've acted to give the Superintendent of Financial Institutions more powers to oversee Canada's financial institutions, and I would urge all members interested in this important issue to look to the statement that he has made on this. We have also been investing in FinTrack and increasing its resources and authorities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, the problem is they're not taking it seriously. According to U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, he said of TD Bank, by making its services convenient for criminals, it became one. Why are the Americans having to catch chartered Canadian banks and charging them with money laundering linked to fentanyl, terrorism, and human trafficking? Could the minister stand up and tell us what charges, what sanctions the TD Bank will face in Canada?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it is entirely reasonable for Americans to police activity that happens in America. That's how sovereignty and jurisdiction works. It is also the case that in May, FinTrack levied a significant penalty against TD for non-compliance with money laundering measures. But I have a question for the member opposite. The Conservatives in this House voted against these measures to protect Canada's financial system.
Why is that?
Why?
Phil.
The Honourable Member from Nunavut.
Okaktiti Redfish Art Studio diverts youth out of the criminal justice system by teaching them skills. This government promised Redfish funding last April, but when the Prime Minister shuffled his cabinet, the new minister cancelled not only their funding, but the much-needed funding for Indigenous languages. Indigenous peoples deserve better than broken promises. Will the minister reverse his decision and fund both the Redfish Art Studio and the Indigenous Languages Program?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, Indigenous skills training is absolutely vital. It's absolutely critical. We have made record historic investments through the Indigenous Skills and Employment Training Program. We will continue to support young people, Indigenous people, and their education, their training, and their skills training. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Griesbach.
John Wells was known by his family and fellow Blood Tribe members as a cowboy, kind and respectful. But that didn't stop Calgary police from assaulting, tasing, pepper spraying, and sedating him while he was lying face down. He died before he ever made it to a hospital. Racism, colonialism, and systemic violence continues to murder Indigenous peoples today. When will the minister act to bring justice and accountability to policing that kills?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the circumstances that my colleague from the NDP just described are deplorable and reprehensible. We all need to do better as a nation, including all law enforcement at every level in this country, in terms of addressing anti-Indigenous racism and addressing the harms that are caused between interactions between law enforcement and Indigenous people on this land. That is work that we are committed to doing in conjunction with that member and all members in this place that see a better vision for a future where reconciliation includes the fight against anti-Indigenous discrimination.
L'honorable député de Châteauguay-Lacolle.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The United Nations, we heard the Minister of Foreign Affairs say that often the people who claim to speak for freedom are the same people who want the government to decide who people can love, who they are, or even what they can wear. We see it in our country, we see it around the world. In Afghanistan, we see it taken to its extreme as the Taliban continues to impose inhumane rules against women and girls. Today, on the International Day of the Girl, I asked the Minister of Foreign Affairs if she can reaffirm our government's commitment to girls.
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada is a country that values freedom from oppression, not freedom to oppress others. The rights of women and girls, including the right to choose, is put in danger by the far right, including some of the members of the Conservative opposition. A Liberal government will always support and protect women's rights and girls' rights, here at home and around the world. So along with Germany, Australia, and the Netherlands, we will hold the Taliban regime accountable for their violations of women and girls' rights in Afghanistan. We will always be there for women at home and around the world. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Portage Lisker.
For 7 years, the Liberals knew Jasper was a tinderbox. Damning testimony has proved the Minister of Environment's negligence. He failed to do everything he could to protect homes, business, and this beloved national park. To stop a raging wildfire, you need two things: remove the heat and apply water. We know beyond a doubt that the minister did neither. A tiny fraction of the dead trees were removed, and shockingly, firefighters were even turned away. How much incompetence does it take to get fired from this Liberal cabinet?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his collaboration on the Environment Committee, where we have been hearing about the circumstances that led to the Jasper wildfire situation, Mr. Speaker. But however, I would like to point out that the over-politicization of this issue, the tabloidization of it, and what they're saying on social media has been absolutely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. As a result of some of those tweets, there are public servants who receive death threats from who are, enraged under these Conservatives and their attempts to politicize this issue. Mr. Speaker, a natural disaster is not a political issue, and our government has done everything that we could to prevent the wildfire.
The Honourable Member from Portage Lisker.
The only thing that Liberals are good at is trying to deflect and distract from their own failures. So let me tell you the facts, Mr. Speaker, about the Jasper fire investigation. They knew about the risk for 7 years and failed to do everything that they could to mitigate it. 20 fire trucks and 50 firefighters were turned away. Parks Canada bought hydrants that didn't even have the proper hookups. It is clear that this fire was a result of negligence or incompetence. So when will the Minister of Environment be shown the door so that other at-risk communities don't face the same fate as Jasper has?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, the Jasper wildfire was started by lightning, and the people that live in Jasper underwent an incredibly difficult summer. And to politicize this issue is unacceptable. Arctic Fire, the organization that my colleague mentioned, is a private for-profit company under direct contract with Alberta Wildfire. They had no direct relationship with Parks Canada, but they did supply Alberta Wildfire with 2 trucks for 4 days, not 20 trucks and not 50 wildfire fighters, as my colleague pointed out. Under advisement of the government of Alberta, they were released by Unified Command, not the federal government, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of National Defence and then Minister of Public Safety slow-walked the issuance of a CSIS warrant to investigate a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister. The minister stalled the issuance of a warrant for 54 days, a warrant that national security officials say should have been issued within 4 to 10 days. So, what is the minister's explanation for this highly suspicious delay?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, for Canadians watching, what I will say to them quite clearly is that we take foreign interference extremely seriously on this side of the House. That is why we have a foreign interference inquiry unfolding before Canadians' eyes as we speak. That is why ministers have been attending and providing answers and clarity for Canadians. We will not take lessons from that side of the House about how to conquer and how to address foreign interference, because this is a priority for our government.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, talk about a non-answer from the minister. 54 days of delay to issue a CSIS warrant to investigate a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister. Incredible. This at a time when the minister was issuing other warrants within a matter of days. Just a coincidence? Come on. So again, what is the explanation for this highly suspicious delay?
That's right.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, we have the foreign interference inquiry unfolding. It is a commission that we established on this side of the House. We had the minister testify as to this very issue at the Foreign Interference Inquiry Commission, and he indicated that when he was presented with the warrant, he addressed it promptly.
4 days.
L'honorable député d'Abitibi, Bay James.
The honourable member for Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, EU. The clock is ticking. Liberals are running out of time before October 29th. They will have to stop avoiding the issue of increasing old age security for 65 to 74-year-olds. 79% of Canadians support pension increases. The House is calling for higher pensions. Seniors groups are calling for higher pensions. But each time the Liberals are asked about it, they hide behind partisan attacks. Will the Liberals increase old age security for 65 to 74-year-olds? Yes or no? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bloc has had multiple occasions to support seniors. It's rather ironic to hear the colleague across the way talk this way, because she is supporting increases for those 65 and over, but they were against bringing the retirement age back down to 65. They voted against increasing the guaranteed income supplement. They voted against our dental care plan. We put forward measures to help seniors, and what does the Bloc do, Mr. Speaker? They vote them down. The honourable member for Abitibi, Nunavik, Bay James, EU. Once again, the Liberals are hiding behind partisan attacks. They think that seniors don't see through their strategy. Seniors can see that the Liberals are refusing to talk about the old age security pension. Let's remind the Liberals that on October 29th, they will no longer be able to hide. They will have to make a decision. Will they increase pensions, or will they explain in an election why they are depriving 1 million Quebecers of additional income? The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, this is not a partisan attack. I'd like to remind the Bloc Québécois that voting in this House is public. It's public knowledge what we vote on, whether we vote in favour or against. The Bloc Québécois voted against increasing the GIS. They voted against pharmacare, which is in effect as of today. They voted against care for diabetics in Quebec. And dental care, Mr. Speaker. Hundreds of thousands of Quebecers support our dental care plan, but the Bloc Québécois is against it. That's not a partisan attack, Mr. Speaker. These are just facts.
This NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up. Mr. Speaker, you ruled that the government violated a House order to turn over evidence about the latest $400 million Liberal scandal, effectively obstructing justice. We have heard new excuses for weeks about why your ruling should not be respected. What smoking gun is in those documents that the Liberals don't want Canadians to see? Is it malfeasance, complete incompetence, or obvious corruption?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's really important to recognize literally thousands and thousands and thousands of pages have been provided on this issue. We need to appreciate that we have the RCMP, the Auditor General, we even have a former law clerk, all saying and expressing concerns in regards to this conservative political game where they are handing documents directly from here to the RCMP. I have a choice, or we have a choice. Do we listen to the political games of the Conservatives, or do we listen to the institutions like our RCMP and our Auditor General? I'm picking the RCMP.
The honourable member from Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, that's a load of stovetop stuffing. This is the latest in a series of scandals involving Liberal insiders riding the gravy train, mashing the truth, stuffing their pockets with taxpayer money, and treating Canadians like turkeys. Parliament has demanded these documents. You, Mr. Speaker, ordered that they be provided. This Liberal government believes that they are above the rules. Canadians are not gobbling up these excuses. When will they turn over the documents and let Parliament get back to work?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, I can assure you this government does not treat the matter as a joke as the Conservatives continue to play a political game at a great cost. We will continue to be focused on Canadians as they continue to be focused on the Conservatives. Listen to what the RCMP actually have to say, Mr. Speaker, and I quote directly. There is significant risk that the motion could be interpreted as a circumvention of normal investigative processes and I underline the word, charter protections. Why won't the Conservative Party listen to what the RCMP and others are saying?
The honourable member from Fort McMurray, Cold Lake.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs up, crimes up, time's up. More proof the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, crime and corruption. The Auditor General found nearly $400 million tax dollars given to Liberal insiders through their Green Slush Fund. 186 conflicts of interest, 10 projects completely ineligible. Yet the Liberals refuse to hand over these documents to the police, effectively obstructing justice and choosing to grind Parliament to a halt. All at a time when Canadians can't afford to eat, heat and house themselves. Will the NDP Liberals end the cover-up, give proof to the police so we can get accountability for corruption and Parliament can get working for Canadians?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, Monday is Thanksgiving. You know what I give thanks for? I give thanks for living in a democracy where we draw a firm line between the police and politicians. That is a line that the Conservatives are asking us to cross. That is a line that the RCMP has flagged that is being crossed as we speak. To continue, they've said, quote, in a free and democratic society, this ensures that the government cannot direct or influence the actions of law enforcement. That's a direct quote from the Chief Commissioner of the RCMP, Mike Duhem. I never thought I'd have to say this in the House of Commons, but I wish for once the Conservatives would listen to the cops.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, for almost a year, Videotron employees in the Outaouais region were on lockout. The employees and their families have suffered as a result. They suffered a lot. But finally, this past Friday, the parties reached an agreement to end the lockout and the workers returned to work. Can the minister tell us how he contributed to resolving this dispute, and can the minister give us more information about this great news? The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, in the Outaouais region and throughout Quebec and Canada, we are thrilled by the resolution of this dispute, which lasted almost a year. Families and workers were affected. 210 families in my region were affected by this lockout. I would like to thank the Federal Mediation and Dispute Resolution Service for their incredible work. This has been a priority for me and my colleagues. Today, we are very relieved and happy to hear that this labour dispute has been solved. The Honourable Member for Montmagny, Lilley, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, what Canadians are calling for and what we are calling for is transparency and integrity. This Liberal government continues to hide behind excuses to obstruct justice. We're having a hard time putting food on the table. And in Ottawa, $400 million went up in smoke in another Liberal corruption scandal. Mr. Speaker, can the Liberals put an end to their cover-up, turn over the evidence to the police, and allow Parliament to work for Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is truly a scandal would be to give in to pressure from Conservative politicians to turn our country into a banana republic. They seem to want to get involved in the RCMP's work, but the RCMP is independent. And in fact, the RCMP even said to us in writing, don't interfere with our investigations because that can undermine them. But the Conservatives, they just want to turn Canada into a banana republic. The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lilley, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, millions of Canadians have to choose between paying their rent or putting food on the table. Meanwhile, this Liberal government is using Canadians' money to help its friends get richer. We're all waiting for explanations about the misappropriation of $400 million of taxpayer money. As if Liberal corruption wasn't bad enough, they're adding insult to injury by refusing to produce the requested documents. Mr. Speaker, when will this Liberal government finally cooperate with the investigations and show a modicum of respect for the taxpayers who are demanding answers? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, it seems to me that the Conservatives don't ask a lot of questions about the economy. Why not? I think that the answer is very obvious. It's because we have good news about the economy. Today, we have a very good piece of news. In September, Canada added 47,000 good jobs to its economy. And for now 20 consecutive months, salaries have outpaced inflation. It's good news about the economy. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the House is still paralyzed due to another corruption scandal involving this Liberal government. The Green Fund has done nothing but create more bureaucracy and line the pockets of Liberal friends. $400 million and 186 conflicts of interest at a time when over 2 million Canadians are going to food banks, which is unprecedented. Why doesn't the government give the police the documents that they need to recover the $400 million of taxpayer money? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Mr. Speaker, we've already answered that question many times. There's one question that hasn't been answered yet, though. Why, in my colleague's riding, why doesn't he invite the leader of the Conservative Party to his riding to talk to the 10,500 residents of his riding who have benefited from the Canadian Dental Care Plan? They're all eligible. They've received an eligibility card. Many of them have already received dental care services. But the Conservative leader says that the dental care plan doesn't even exist. So when will the leader go to Beauce, to the members' riding, to tell them it doesn't exist?
Mr. Speaker, yesterday was a momentous day for Canadian health care. Bill C-64, the Pharmacare Act, received royal assent. This legislation will establish a framework for national, publicly funded, single-payer, universal drug coverage and will ensure that Canadians across the country have access to the diabetes medications and contraception they need. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health share with this House what passing this landmark pharmacare legislation will mean for the health of Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Speaker. And yes, it was an exciting day. The pharmacare is law now in Canada. Hello. That means that 3.5 million Canadians now will have access to diabetic medications. That means 9 million women can have access to contraceptives. Now, Speaker, we knew that the Conservatives are always against public healthcare systems, so they voted against this. But what's really disappointing is that NDP ripped the agreement, their own words, that actually delivering progress. They have chosen politics over progress. They're no different than the Conservatives. We will stand up for Canadians every single time.
The Honourable Member from Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, ever since Hello Ferries launched their high-speed service between Nanaimo and Vancouver, my constituent, Jamie Coleman, like other Canadians who use a wheelchair, is forced out of his chair and carried on board. This is disrespectful and embarrassing. Hello Ferries has a wheelchair custom installed, yet Transport Canada continues to delay regulatory approval. No one in a wheelchair should have to endure this just to take a ferry. When will the minister take action to ensure all Canadians can travel with dignity?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Citizen Services. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my colleague on behalf of persons living with disabilities in Canada. We have worked together on the first piece of Canadian legislation for an inclusive Canada, legislation for persons with disabilities. That's been a hallmark of our government's work. We have invested $6 billion. That's a historic investment, and this is just the start. There will be further steps. We will develop a plan to ensure that Canada is fully accessible for everyone.
Manage Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2016, the City of Burnaby has opposed the Trans Mountain Pipeline due to what it sees as an unacceptable risk of fire in populated areas from the expanded tank farm. Last week, the TMX Corporation bribed and gagged the City of Burnaby, paying them $21 million over 20 years, and to say, don't criticize us anymore. It's now a rule. You're not allowed to say anything about the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Did anyone on the Liberal front benches know about this? Did anyone on the government front bench approve spending taxpayers' dollars to bribe and gag the City of Burnaby?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member opposite, or virtually opposite, for her hard work for many years fighting for Canadians and speaking up for climate action. And I want to go to the issue, I think, at the heart of her work, which is the need for strong climate action. I am really proud to be a member of a government that has made climate actor party which continues to advocate for a price on pollution, the most economically rational way to fight climate change.
Before we move on to points of order, I'd like to remind all members, I'd like to wish all members, rather, a happy week in their constituencies for those who are leaving right after question period. And I'd like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving.
Leave this place for the weekend with your families. Je vois un rappel au règlement.
On a point of order, the Honourable Member for Saint Jean. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to quickly come back, if you don't mind, to the comments made by the member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands earlier this morning. In Quebec, a report was recently tabled about women's involvement in politics. We already know that there are obstacles to women's participation in politics, but we also know that a lot of women leave politics faster than men. Among the obstacles, there's threats, risk to security, which is higher for women, but there's also attacks on women's physical appearance and dress. So there appears to be a double standard when it comes to that. And the comments we heard this morning were not directed at a woman, but it might seem harmless as a one-off, and there might be no follow-up, but indirectly, that might make people feel that it's okay to make that kind of comment, and it might discourage people from entering politics, particularly women, from getting involved in politics. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd appreciate that the next time someone makes a crack like that, that the House should not just be reminded about the importance of using parliamentary language, but also that there should be an apology and a withdrawal of that comment, such comments.
Order. Order. Yes. Colleagues. I'm going to ask members, please. So, a couple of things. Tout d'abord,
colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Saint Jean for raising that point. I think it's very important to remind everyone that the Chair is fully aware of this situation, and that's why I rose to invite the Honourable Member who made the comment to withdraw and start afresh without saying the same thing. But I see that the honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Island wishes to take the floor.
I see the honourable member from Milton is rising on his feet on the same point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank my friend and colleague for those comments. They were very well considered and well put. And to be honest, I hadn't really considered the gender implications of the insults from the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes earlier. However, you know, I'm that when people run out of arguments in this place, they resort to personal attacks. They resort to calling names and using pejoratives and referring to each other's appearances. And that's below the House of Commons. It's actually something that I think a school-aged person would receive detention for or would be called out for as inappropriate behavior. Mr. Speaker, if the member has some sartorial advice for me, that's fine. We can talk about it in the halls. But I don't think we should be resorting to ad hominem attacks. And I would, again, like to thank my friend and colleague for the very well considered argument. And I'd appreciate an apology because it's childish and beneath this place. Thank you.
So I thank all honourable members. I see no one else is rising on the same point of order. As I'd indicated earlier, the honourable member did, when brought to the attention by the Speaker, rephrase the question afterwards. If it's necessary, I will look into this matter further. But for the time being, I'd like to wish the honourable members to let honourable members that this was brought up and this was recognized by the Speaker, and I hope we can move on to this. I wish to inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be reset. Members using their earpiece at this time will have to readjust the volume.
I wish to inform the House that the earpiece volume will be reduced. Members using earpieces will have to readjust their volume.
Affaires courantes ordinaires. Dépôt de documents.
Tabling of documents. Introduction of government bills, statements by ministers, reports from interparliamentary delegations, presenting reports from committees, introduction of private members' bills, first reading of Senate public bills, motions, presenting petitions.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition. Petitioners note that an estimated 27 Canadians a day are diagnosed with a brain tumor. Canada is years behind the United States in approving new drugs and treatments which could have an impact on thousands of brain cancer patients. And there continues to be a shortage of brain cancer drugs in Canada. And with that in mind, the petitioners call on the Government of Canada to increase funding for brain cancer research, work with provinces and territories to ensure that drugs, medical services, and new therapies are accessible to brain cancer patients nationwide, and thirdly, to remove unnecessary red tape so brain cancer drugs can be approved expeditiously.
Petitions. Pétition, l'honorable député de Pontiac.
The honourable member for Pontiac. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I have an important petition which was started by the spokesperson for the Tramway Coalition. There are over 900 signatories who are residents of the region. The petition calls on the government to fund the Ottawa side of the Gatineau-Ottawa tramway as soon as possible to ensure that this important project goes forward, which will be a constructive project that we really need in our area, Mr. Speaker.
Petition. Petitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, resuming debate on a motion relating to privilege concerning failure to produce documents pertaining to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and on the sub-amendment of Mr. Muse.
Resuming questions and comments to the honourable member of Bruce Grey Owen Sound. The honourable member from Barrie Easonsville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity. I know it's been an hour and a half since the member was last speaking about this issue, and I'm just wondering, I know he's had a lot of communication from his constituents, whether he's heard from any more of his constituents, either now or in the past, about this issue.
Peace, love. The honourable member from Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. And great question, because unfortunately I did have to cut off about a page or two of the commentary. But here's another comment, feedback I got back from one of my constituents this morning. This is from Eric. Quote, "It is the equivalent to insider trading and should have similar punishment attached to it for all parties involved. Government should be held to stricter rules than the general public and should never be allowed to escape punishment that the general public would not be able to. Using public office for personal gain is disgraceful and frankly disgusting." Unquote.
Questions and comments. The honourable member from Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to give a quote, and it's a direct quote from someone in which I think Canadians would respect greatly, and that's the former law clerk here of the Parliament of Canada. Now, I would suggest to you this is an individual that is truly independent, and what he says should be taken with very serious consideration, no matter what part of the House one sits in. This is the quote. "It is an abuse of its powers for the House to use its power to demand and get documents from the government in order to transfer them to a third party, RCMP, that wouldn't otherwise receive them, or to compel the government to give documents to the third party." Look at what professionals, individuals, independent offices, this is one example, not to say what the RCMP are saying. Why is the Conservative Party so focused on continuing with the political game as opposed to listening to what these independent agencies are saying?
The honourable member from Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Look, I'm not aware of any political games. As I highlighted clearly in my speech, I'm speaking to this motion for the first time in a speech. The member that just asked me the question has already spent over an hour and a half speaking. He's given 2 speeches on this actual privilege motion. So if anybody's playing games, 2 on this, over an hour and a half, he speaks 10 times more in this chamber than I do, so I don't understand how it's political games for me to speak on behalf of my constituents. And I literally read, Mr. Speaker, 15 minutes of quotes, and I have pages of them. 450 constituents have given me feedback of how upset they are about this illegitimate use of taxpayers' money. And ultimately, if the former law clerk has advice, he maybe should have provided that to the current law clerk, because it was the motion here that was supported by the majority of the members, and in your ruling, Mr. Speaker, that actually demanded that these documents be turned over.
Resuming debate, the honourable member from Langley Aldergrove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People back at home in Langley, British Columbia, are asking me what is going on in Ottawa. Why has Parliament come to a halt? What is the impasse so soon into the fall session? And they're asking, so if the NDP tore up their supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals, what happened there? Well, the NDP discovered that hitching their wagon to the Prime Minister's train wasn't really helping them very much where it really counts, and that is at the polls. And then the Bloc Québécois, nature abhors a vacuum, so the Bloc Québécois jumped in and started flirting with the Liberal government in the hope of maybe leveraging some favors, but they too are finding out that being closely aligned with this Prime Minister in the waning days of his political career probably isn't all that good as a political strategy. Now, both these opposition parties are learning what has been obvious party for a long, long time, and that is that this Prime Minister really has what resembles a Midas touch, or the opposite thereof. You know, King Midas got his wish that everything that he touched would turn into gold, which was really cool for a little while until even his food started turning into gold and he was going to starve to death. Well, the Prime Minister has something similar. Everything that he touches gets tarnished and eventually falls apart in a pile of dust.
So true.
There are a couple of examples. The We Charity, which at one time was a functional charity here in Canada, very high profile, worked with school kids. It had the additional advantage of being closely aligned with the Prime Minister, some of his cabinet ministers, and some of their family members. So the Prime Minister thought he would reciprocate that friendship by selecting We Charity without any competition at all to distribute almost $1 billion of COVID relief money. Now, it was a short-lived golden moment for this charity that ended up when all the conflicts became public. The harm was done. They shut their doors. Their history, no thank you, no thanks to the Prime Minister. Now, SNC-Lavalin, another example, it was a profitable engineering and construction company with big projects right across this country and around the world. Now, they made mistakes, admittedly, but if the Prime Minister had just left them alone, they would still be a thriving company today. His then Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, Canada's first Indigenous Attorney General, had one idea based on the professional advice she was getting as to how to prosecute this company, but the Prime Minister had quite a different idea, so he fired his his Attorney General. Think of that, Canada's self-declared feminist Prime Minister firing Jody Wilson-Raybould, Canada's female Attorney General and first ever Indigenous Attorney General. I read her autobiography, as I hope that everybody has, because it's very informative. And she says in there, quite frankly, I wish I had never met the Prime Minister. She told him right to his face. And Mr. Speaker, there are many other people who have been too closely associated with the Prime Minister who failed the same. Another example would be former Governor General David Johnston, a man with a huge reputation in Canada for the services that he has provided to his nation. He was appointed to...
The honourable member from Edmonton Strathcona is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to request that you look through the chamber. It appears that we do not have quorum to continue on this debate.
We have quorum. To count? Maybe not. Maybe you can't count.
Indeed, the honourable member is correct. I thank the honourable member, and the bells will be rung. At this point, we do have quorum in the House. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member from Langley Aldergrove has 16 minutes and 5 seconds left on the clock.
Mr. Speaker, I was sharing with the audience here, the now expanding audience, about some of the travesty that the Prime Minister has wreaked upon great institutions and also great people like David Johnston, the former Governor General of this country, a man with a huge reputation until the Prime Minister appointed him as special rapporteur on foreign interference into our elections, our democratic institutions. That appointment was despite the close ties that Mr. Johnston had with the Trudeau family and the Trudeau Foundation, a foundation that had received funds from a foreign nation, which was going to be the subject of the investigation. Now, maybe this obvious conflict of interest wasn't immediately obvious to our high school drama teacher prime minister, but it certainly should have been obvious to highly educated David Johnston. Unfortunately, he didn't get it, he didn't understand it, or he turned a blind eye to it. Anyways, at the end, he resigned, another fatality of this prime minister's golden touch. Now, I could go on and on with other examples. I could mention the Winnipeg Lab affair, the ArriveCam scam, the Billionaire Island scandal. Some of my colleagues have raised those already. I'm not going to belabor the point, other than to relate this back to the question of the day: what happened to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDTC, or better known now known by its new nickname, the Liberal Party Green Slush Fund? What happened there? A little bit of history. SDTC, I'm going to call it, was created by an act of Parliament back in the Liberal Prime Minister John Chrétien days to promote investment in green technology, a laudable objective. It continued its work under Prime Minister Stephen Harper and likely would be thriving today if the current Prime Minister had just left it alone, but he could not resist the temptation of firing the people who were there and putting his own friends in place instead. That's what went wrong there. Friends that sat on the board and, despite conflicts of interest, distributed money amongst themselves, insiders helping other insiders, Liberal friends helping each other. Now, we know all of this from the Independent Auditor's Report, number 6, which he tabled in Parliament on June 4th, 2024, just a couple of weeks before the House rose for the summer break. It is highly critical of what was happening at SDTC. Examples from the report, and I'm not going to get into the detail because the report is public information. $390 million of misallocated dollars, taxpayer funds, that were granted to insiders or to non-qualifying projects. This is insiders on the board of directors supporting each other in their grant applications. 186 examples of conflict of interest, board members voting for each other's applications. The Auditor General learned about this from a whistleblower. And this is what one of those whistleblowers told the committee that is now looking into it, the Standing Parliamentary Committee. And I quote from their testimony: "Just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement of SDTC, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization." So there you have it, Mr. Speaker. It's not just mismanagement, but it's criminality. So we, the official opposition, the Conservative Party, did what we were elected to do, holding this government to account and uncovering corruption. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So we're doing our job. We put forward a motion shortly after the auditor's report was tabled. I'm just going to read a small little piece of it. That the House order the government, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and the Auditor General, each to deposit with the law clerk and the Parliamentary Council within 30 days of the adoption of this order the following documents related to or dated since January 1, 2017. Now, the order goes on to describe what some of those documents are, the different types, and the different categories. This Conservative motion passed a little while later, June 10th, 2024, with the support of the other opposition parties, the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. Only Liberal members of Parliament voted against it. Now, I know that the Liberals are not happy with the order, but this is the reality of a minority house. This is the way it works. They don't have a majority. They need to play nice with and get support from one of the opposition parties. They failed to do that, and they are now stuck with this order that they say they don't like. Well, too bad. Parliament is supreme. Parliament made that order. The Liberal Party must now comply with it. The governing party doesn't have a choice not to comply with it. And that, Mr. Speaker, is what happened. We all got, nothing happened during the summer. Some of the documents got delivered, but not all. Clearly, the order was not complied with. And we got back here in September after the summer break, and things started to get very ugly. On the first day back in the House, our House Leader, the member for Regina Capel, rose on a question of privilege, quote, concerning the failure of the government to comply with the order that the House adopted on Monday, June 10th. Now, I don't have to repeat anything in the House Leader's speech. It's in Hansard for anybody who is interested in reading it. I can tell you that it is well researched, it is well written, and it's convincing. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, it convinced you. And a couple of days later, you made your ruling. The ruling confirms the earlier order. The Prime Minister's office and all relevant government departments must comply with the original document production order as demanded, unredacted. The Liberal House Leader has been leading a valiant but ultimately failing charge against this document production order and the Speaker's ruling. Now, she raises several interesting but specious constitutional arguments, and here I would summarize it as follows. Number one, the document production order trespasses on the Charter right of freedom from unreasonable search and seizure, Section 8 of the Charter. Number two, the document production order exceeds the authority of the House by attempting to secure documents for a third party, namely the RCMP. And third, the document production order is an unconstitutional attempt by the House of Commons to appropriate the role of another branch of government, namely the judiciary. All interesting and creative arguments, but in my submission, ineffective and a little late in the day as far as the Speaker was concerned. In his words, in his ruling, he said, the Chair would suggest respectfully that these concerns should have been raised prior to the motion's adoption. Well, you know, the first thing that we learned in law school was that if you're going to be present in court, you better get all the evidence in, all the facts, and all your arguments before the judge makes his ruling, not afterwards. It's too late. The Speaker came to the reasonable conclusion that the document production order of a couple of months earlier stands, that it was not followed, and that the Liberals are wrong, wrong, wrong. The Prime Minister's office must comply with the document production order. Now, a couple of quotes from your ruling, Mr. Speaker. The House has the undoubted right to order the production of any and all documents from any individual or entity it deems necessary to carry out its duties. These powers are a settled matter, at least as far as the House is concerned. They have been confirmed and reconfirmed by immediate predecessors as well as those more distantly lived. And the Chair cannot come to any other conclusion but to find that a prima facie question of privilege has been established. That's the ruling. And that means that the government must comply, and the Prime Minister's office, the PMO, must make it clear to the departments that the House order ought to be complied with fully. I know the Liberals aren't happy with this, with the original motion or with the ruling. But I think it's important, you know, and they say, well, it's unusual. This is not normal course of business. Well, maybe so, but it is a ruling of the House, and the House is supreme, and they can make this order, as the Speaker has ruled. And I think it's important to highlight at this time that the other two opposition parties, the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, speakers have both noted that while the order might be unusual, that fact does not excuse non-compliance, and I would underline that. There is no excuse for non-compliance. Experts agree with that position. I'm going to quote from Boskin Gagnon, experts in this field, House of Commons Practice and Procedures. I'm reading from the third edition, 2017, at page 985, which talks about Parliament's right to order the production of documents. And I quote, "No statute or practice diminishes the fullness of that power rooted in House privileges unless there is an explicit provision to that effect. or unless the House adopts a specific resolution limiting that power. The House has never set a limit on its power to order the production of papers and records. So there you go, Mr. Speaker, the production order stands. It has an ancient history that Parliament can do this, and the Prime Minister refuses to comply, and that is why we are at an impasse. That's why things have ground to a halt, and until it is resolved, nothing will be debated but this issue. The Liberals blame it on us. I'm saying you need to comply with the orders. Canadians want to know, what is in those documents? What are they hiding? I think that's really the fundamental question. What are they worried about? The Speaker, Mr. Speaker, you were trying to be helpful, and you suggested that maybe all the parties could just send this off to the committee and have a look at it there. But you do note correctly in my submission that, quote, it is ultimately for the House to decide how it wishes to proceed. The House has decided. The House has ordered production of the documents. The Prime Minister and the Liberal Party must comply. Now, the way I see it, Mr. Speaker, they have three choices. They can comply with the order, which I think is what we've been saying all along for the last 9 days. Or number two, they can sue the Speaker. I know you won't take that personally. They've done that before. They can challenge your ruling based on all the specious arguments that they have put forward already. Or they can have to dissolve the 44th Parliament and call an election. This is what we've been calling all along. Now, my preference, number one, is obviously the simplest and the cleanest. We just comply with the order and we get on with business. We can then send it to committee. Or number two, the most interesting really would be to sue the Speaker. The Liberals have done this in the past, and then they changed their mind and dissolved Parliament and called an election. Well, I can tell you, as a student of constitutional law and Canadian history, I think that would be the most interesting. Let's go ahead and do it. See if the Supreme Court will even take the case on. If they do, it's going to make great Canadian history. Now, the number three would be the best for Canada, and that is simply to dissolve this Parliament, call an election. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I spoke to a lot of people in my riding back at home during the summer months, and this is what they're calling for. Go, call the election. Call it now, as soon as possible. This is what people want because they deserve a government that will stop the corruption, that will fix what the Liberals have broken, and that will offer common sense solutions to the problems facing ordinary Canadians today. Canadians deserve a government that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Canadians deserve a government that doesn't play favorites with their insiders and where non-insiders can work hard and get ahead. Canadians deserve a Canada that delivers on its promise to all who call it home, that hard work earns powerful paychecks, that buy affordable homes on safe streets in a country where anyone from anywhere can accomplish anything. Mr. Speaker, all of this is possible, but first, the Prime Minister has to call an election. Do it now.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, the political game that the Conservatives have entered into, people need to be aware of the fact that you have the former law clerk that says that what the Conservative tactic is an abuse of power. What do the RCMP say? The RCMP say that what is being asked for causes a great deal of concern as they raise the issue of the Charter. You have the Auditor General of Canada reinforcing what it is that the RCMP are saying. Every time I've asked this question in terms of why it is Canadians should actually listen to the Conservatives and their political game versus these independent institutions, Mr. Speaker, none of them will give a straight answer to Canadians. Why should we take the advice of the Conservatives over and above those?
The honourable member from Langley Aldergrove.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to turn that around as a question to the member from Winnipeg North. Why don't they comply with the order? Parliament is supreme. We have the right to make this order. We did make the order. Too bad it's a minority government for you. For the Liberal Party. But it is an order of this House. It must be complied with. There's an ancient tradition in our Parliament that we have the authority, we have the right to make these kinds of orders. What do the Liberals have? What are they hiding from? What are they afraid of? And why are they hiding behind Section 8 of the Charter, which is there to protect individuals from government action, not the other way around? Thank you.
L'honorable député de Joliette.
The honourable member from Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his speech. We have been debating this in the House for about 2 weeks. This is the Friday in a row that the House has been discussing this question of privilege. The government has still not produced the documents that the majority of elected members in this place have called on the government to produce. We don't seem to be making any progress. It also seems that the government is in no rush to get back to other legislation. So in my colleague's opinion, why is the government not in any rush? After 9 years, is it because this government is shop-worn and has no new legislation to put forward? Follow-up question. Does this mean there's a possibility of proroguing? The lights have started to be turned off on that side of the House. Is this not the beginning of the end for this government? Mr. Speaker.
Langley Aldergrove.
Well, I would like to thank my friend and colleague from the Lac Québécois for that interesting question. The easy answer is, the Liberals aren't going to take any advice from me. I wish they would, because we've got some pretty good common sense advice to give them. Why aren't they anxious and eager to get on with their their legislative agenda? I don't know. But I can tell you that people in my riding aren't all that anxious for this Liberal government to continue with some of their legislation. They're ill-advised, they're poorly thought-out legislation like the capital gains tax inclusion rate increases. People in my riding don't want that. They see that this is wrong-headed. So perhaps it's okay for this government not to be advancing their legislative agenda right now.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Strathcona.
Why, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And during my colleague's speech, it did become a little darker and darker here, I have to admit. But one of the things that he started with when he began his speech is talking about the NDP working with the Liberals. And I wanted to take a moment today to acknowledge the important work that happened and that was finished in the Senate yesterday, when Pharmacare actually was passed through the Senate, brought back to this House, and that millions of Canadians now will have access to a Pharmacare program. It's very, very exciting, and I think it shows that there are things that we can do where we work together. As an opposition member, I work when I can for Canadians, and I oppose when I think that the government is not taking the right steps that will help Canadians. So very proud of dental care, very proud of Pharmacare, very proud of the anti-scab legislation. What I do wonder about, though, and I wonder if my colleague from Langley Aldergrove could comment on, is for Canadians who are struggling right now, Canadians who are finding housing unaffordable, who can't afford their groceries, do you think that they see 3 weeks spent in this House not talking about ways to make their lives better is an appropriate use of parliamentary time?
The honourable member from Langley Aldergrove.
Well, I would like to thank my colleague for that question. Yes, indeed, I think that we should get on with debating things that are important to Canadians, like axing the tax and building homes that are affordable for people, getting the cost of living under control, and encouraging this corrupt government to get on with the business of running this place in a clean and clear and ethical manner. That's what we should be debating right now. Thank you.
The honourable member from Cariboo Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's funny when the NDP stand up and talk about all these things that they say that they've done. They failed to mention that for 4.5 years or 5 years, as long as that agreement was in place, they propped up this government. They were complicit with all the corruption and scandal that we're seeing here. But that's besides the point, Mr. Speaker. That's as the heckles come from the NDP. They're obviously very, very worried about their own positions. Mr. Speaker, through you, I'd like to ask our honourable colleague, what we're talking about here is essentially the theft or the misappropriation of about $400 million of Canadian taxpayer funds that went to a green slush fund that was loaded with Liberal cronies, a Liberal chair, that themselves got rich off of. And the Auditor General found 186 conflicts of interest with this. The whistleblower found indeed that there might be some criminality there. The Liberals like to say, well, the RCMP don't want to see these documents. Well, they don't know what's in these documents. Nobody does, because it's all been redacted. So through you, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask that if somebody stole something from this member, would he go to a committee or would he go to the RCMP? Because essentially what we're talking about is the theft of Canadian taxpayer funds.
The honourable member from Langley Aldergrove.
My colleague makes a great point. Indeed, this is theft. It's not just us who's saying it, it's the independent auditor who has said it. It's the the Conflict of Interest Commissioner who has raised deep concerns about this. And indeed, we as the opposition would not be doing our job if we were not holding the government to account on this what looks like scandalous behavior, probably criminal behavior. We need to get to the bottom of this, and I just wish that the side of the House would work with us to get to the bottom of this. They say that they don't like corruption either. Well, work with us, and let's have a look at what these documents say. Give it to the RCMP. Let them decide how to prosecute.
Exactly.
Thank you.
The honourable member from Winnipeg North.
Again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Abuse of power. That is what the Conservatives are being accused of. The Conservatives are also ignoring the independent agency we know and the institution of the RCMP. That's what we know. The Conservatives are playing a political game here. And fortunate, because they're more concerned about the Conservative Party of Canada than they are about the citizens of Canada. When will they get their priorities right, Mr. Speaker, and start focusing on what's in the best interests of Canadians as opposed to the Conservative Party, and start listening to the RCMP, the Auditor General, the former law clerk, the former deputy commissioner of the RCMP?
The honourable member from Langley Aldergrove.
Well, really what should be happening is that the Liberal Party should be listening to what Parliament has told them to do. Exactly. Parliament is supreme. Parliament has a right to make these types of orders. And talk about abuse of power, let's talk about the invocation of the Emergencies Act. That was an abuse of power. The courts have ruled on that. These Liberals have nothing to be proud of. They're the ones who should be taking good legal advice. Thank you.
That's a good point. Regrettably, we've pretty much come to the end of answers. Unless there was somebody wants to ask a 10-second question, get a 10-second answer. The honourable member from Caribou Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And through you, Mr. Speaker, I just want to give our honourable colleague just one brief more opportunity to talk about the scandalous nature of this government. Thank you.
Member.
Very scandalous. Well, I can tell you, we're all getting very tired of it, and I see that member from Bruce Grey Owen Sound is gone, but he had many quotes from many constituents who are sick and tired of the corruption from this government. In my riding, same thing.
I thank the honourable member for keeping his answer brief. Resuming debate, please to débat, the honourable member from Red Deer, Mountain View.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I became a parliamentarian, first for the member of Red Deer, and now as representative for the great riding of Red Deer Mountain View. I spent 35 years as a high school math and physics teacher. And as such, I always felt that when dealing with problems, I believe it's critical to be concise and to work with undeniable facts. And this is a task that we all have here at hand in this House, a task that this House seized over a grievous disservice to the Canadian public, a task that must continue to go forward until this grievous matter has been rightfully resolved. But of course, whether or not this can be resolved remains to be seen, as the Liberal government thinks it can gaslight Canadians into believing that somehow enabling corruption protects Canadians. Let me be on the record today that this government's reaction to the production order of the Speaker shows that they are only interested in protecting those that have been the benefactors of 9 years of corruption, irresponsible deficits, and dishonesty to the Canadian taxpayer. I and the people of Red Deer Mountain View have seen enough. Here's what we're up against. What you get when you have significant lapses in governance and stewardship, plus poor management over conflicts of interest, plus non-compliance with the law. Mr. Speaker, you get corruption, plain and simple. And this is the root cause of the case we, as His Majesty's official opposition and as servants to Canadians, are prosecuting today. The Auditor General found all those ingredients for corruption in a blistering report released this past summer. Now, I've spent many years sitting on the Public Accounts Committee, and since the time of Sheila Fraser, have had the greatest respect for the officials that work at the Auditor General's office. What they have uncovered is mind-boggling. Now, as a teacher, whenever my students were tasked with solving a difficult physics problem, you know what they had to do? They had to show their work. And when the first steps became clear, they could easier progress through to the next stage of the solution. Students had to show how they came up with an answer to get the problems they were attempting to solve. And this gets more challenging and the more difficult and complex the problem becomes. But in that way, basic truths allow them to analyze and solve more complicated questions. So I'll acknowledge that managing a federal government, the federal government, is an easy task. Overseeing how we will feed Canadians and our allies around the world, how we will safeguard the value of Canadian sovereignty and citizenship, and how we will have secure, reliable, affordable energy for all Canadians is indeed a complex venture. But these federal departments that we rely on must build upon trust and truth. It's all the more an indictment on this government that they are unwilling to show their work and fulfill an order from the House to produce the documents that you, Mr. Speaker, have decreed that this government clearly did not comply to. Mr. Speaker, if we are supposed to tell our children, our youth, the bright-minded young minds of the future, that they need to show their work when solving their math homework, why on earth is our federal government not able to do the same? And so, Mr. Speaker, I have a suggestion as to why. Maybe it has to do with the reality that they are so caught up in their desperate attempts to cling to power that they will ignore House orders to procure documents on their failed, glorified slush fund, and that they will overlook what Canadians coast to coast already see when they tune in to their federal legislature. That this government has lost control of this House and must accept the reality that Canada is ready for a change for the better, a change that will do away with scandal after scandal after scandal. In the Auditor General's report that I mentioned earlier, the report makes it clear that Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC, did not establish clear assessment guidance to determine eligibility of projects. So let's allow that to sink in. According to the SDTC's website, as of March 31st, 2023, they had given out $1.71 billion in funding. Assessments guidance that determines eligibility of projects is fancy talk for how decisions are made to give money to projects and businesses. It's absolutely ridiculous, then, that a federally funded foundation under this government's watch was able to hand out taxpayers' dollars without a clear idea of who ought to be deserving of those funds to achieve the objectives its organizations were established to fulfill. It's no different than if a football team were to run plays and make decisions without the notion of a playbook. The idea that taxpayer dollars were allowed to be played with in this manner is unacceptable and frankly disturbing. To better illuminate the gravity of this situation, I should once again draw on my teaching experience. So let's all put ourselves in the shoes of a grade 11 high school student who's beginning to complete what teachers sometimes call an independent research project. So in an independent research project, usually students are tasked with coming up with a topic to study, but the important part of the teacher is to give students a framework with which they will be able to structure their assignment and therefore use their findings effectively. Without an assignment structure or grading criteria, students are left with little to go on. So do we want federally funded foundations to be in the habit of having little to go on? What I'm trying to highlight by drawing out these parallels that we take for granted as common sense in a classroom is that these classroom experiences often seem to be very similar to what happens in the real world. Perhaps this is by design. That's why I believe this picture that I'm trying to paint for Canadians, for those who I've had the pleasure of teaching, and for all of us here in this House. The Auditor General's report also found that the SDTC poorly managed conflicts of interest. And this, my colleagues, is really where I struggle to find any sort of solace from the Liberal government's response to this scandal. SDTC records showed that conflict of interest policies were not followed in 90 cases, and that SDTC did not report conflicts of interest. I say this is shocking, but it's on par with what we and Canadians have now come to expect from our current government. And this is a shame. There is an obvious reality that in order for Canada to be the greatest country on earth, we need a new government that respects the rights of Canadians, has integrity, and possesses a strong commitment to principles. It would seem that this no longer is the case after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. Back in the day, to their credit, Liberals stayed true to their word and would aim to avoid such scandals, although the Gomery inquiry shook their confidence so many years ago. However, today, those actions are commonplace and feel as though they are just a matter of daily business. True Liberals are now fleeing what has now become a shadow of its former self. So I'm a firm believer that humility is a virtue, and a particularly valuable one for an elected representative of the people. Is it not common sense for us? Is it not common sense for decision makers of a fund to recuse themselves from an investment decision regarding a firm that they have clear ties to? I'm sure it must be challenging to conduct this practice when the fund in question is both funded by this Liberal government and also is in talks with firms that have strong insider connections to their network. And so I ask again, would it not be common sense to do what's best for the fund's performance and, in this case, the value for money received from Canadian taxpayer dollars? But if it is, as I suspect, then why has there been a failure to implement such an obvious standard to a federally funded foundation that had used at least $1 billion in taxpayers' funds? So let's know that those who are listening now that it was common sense Conservatives who fought against this corrupt government after 9 years, and it'll be common sense Conservatives who will work diligently to undo the mess that this has caused our nation. So I've already pointed out that the Auditor General had serious concerns with this glorified green slush fund. I would also like to bring it all together to a final point, and this goes back to what fundamentally shapes government. It's people. The former chair of the SDTC had to resign as she was found to have improperly furthered the interests of companies associated with her own ventures, according to the Ethics Commissioner. Now, this is not right. The Ethics Commissioner also found that this individual participated in funding decisions that benefited her own financial interests. SDTC staff even tried to raise concerns with the staff of ISED and its minister at the time, but their concerns were ultimately dismissed. I can only know why these concerns were dismissed, but Mr. Speaker, I can tell you one thing. There has been innocent, hardworking Canadians caught in the crosshairs of this mess. On this side of the House, I believe I speak for my colleagues in that we believe in fair and just prosecution, and that I believe the inability of this Liberal government and a select elite few calling shots in these agencies and foundations that are supposed to be at arm's length does not reflect everyone involved. But that is truly the saddest part of it all. Everywhere this Liberal government has gone and touched with its paws, it has sown disorder, distrust, and broke the fabric that holds this country together. This Liberal government has lost control of their spending. After promising in 2015 that they would temporarily be in a deficit, a claim outgoing Prime Minister Stephen Harper called out from the beginning, and a claim that has cost many young Canadians affordable gas, food, and a warm place to call home. And of course, losing the humility to produce documents that would hold themselves to account even when the Speaker of the House rules that they contradict what would be in the best interest of Canadians is on them. I said at the beginning of my remarks that, and I'll say it once again, that enough is enough. This Liberal government has a history of legislative maneuvering that it uses to avoid accountability. Many believed the rhetoric of the need for a COVID election back in 2021. But the reality was that they were caught up in a scandal then as well. And that scandal involved them not wanting to provide documents for the Winnipeg lab fiasco. Of course, by calling an election, they could and did put that controversy behind them, at least for a while. A $600 million cabinet shuffle during a pandemic election was all it took to take the heat off the fact that the Speaker had moved to the next steps of controversy and took the government to court. Whether this Speaker takes similar steps remains to be seen. But the pattern is clear. Maybe proroguing Parliament will shift the focus, but when Parliament resumes after such a move, this matter still needs to be resolved. To remind Canadians of where we were at June 2021, let me read from a press release pointing out to the defiance of this government in releasing documents. This comes from the honourable member from Wellington Halton Hills and the honourable member from Louis Saint Laurent, the House Leader of the Opposition. They issued the following statement after the House adopted a fourth order requiring the Liberal government to hand over documents regarding a transfer of dangerous virus from the Winnipeg National Microbiology Lab to the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the subsequent firing of 2 government scientists. So yesterday, in quotes, the Speaker of the House ruled the Liberal government in breach of 3 orders of the House and its Special Committee on Canada-China Relations by continuing to cover up the Winnipeg lab breach. These orders require the government to hand over documents related to the Winnipeg lab and its work with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Liberal government's defiance of these orders demonstrates a complete lack of respect for Parliament and smacks of a cover-up. On June 2nd, the House adopted a motion ordering the government to hand over documents regarding the transfer of viruses from the Winnipeg lab to the Wuhan lab in March 2019 and the subsequent firing of 2 government scientists in January of 2021. This June 2nd order followed 2 previous orders from the Special Committee of March 31st and May 10th. Despite these orders, the Liberals continue to defy Parliament and cover up information about these breaches of national security. It's appalling to see just how far they will go to defy Parliament and cover up details about the Winnipeg lab and its relationship with the Wuhan lab. Some Conservatives have once again demanded the Liberal government release the documents they are hiding from Canadians so that Parliament can get to the bottom of this and ensure these breaches of national security do not happen again. However, the Liberals continue the cover-up by voting against a motion upholding the Speaker's ruling demanding the documents. And now, for the 4th time, the House has ordered the Liberal government to hand over the documents. We expect the Prime Minister to comply with this lawful order. And I would further on to state that it's time Liberals end their cover-up. It's time for Liberals to release documents and be transparent with Canadians, as Canadians deserve to know the truth about what happened at the Winnipeg lab and the breaches of national security, and Canada's Conservatives are fighting to protect our national security. So, as I said, these things have happened before. Now, there's another aspect of this that warrants more scrutiny. And I have a great deal of respect for Canadian innovators. The technology that has been supported since Sustainable Development Technology Canada was established in 2001 has been a constructive part of Canada's research and development mix. This government's obsession with green technology and the narrow scope that they've showed lately to such technology is defined, along with the now obvious lack of discipline by the board, which gives true meaning to the Green Slush Fund. What the AG found and what committee members have dug up is that 82% of funding transactions approved by the board over a 5-year sampling period was said to be conflicted. Through the AG's analysis of 226 contracts, 186 were conflicted. Then it's entirely possible that the total 405 transactions approved by the board, that a corresponding 333 contacts, could also be suspect. If the ratios were correct, there would be a further 147 suspicious contracts. A federal investigation would need to get started really soon to get to the bottom of this, since this entire affair reeks of corruption. If laws were broken and rules were ignored, then this government must get to the bottom of this. If CERB recipients were forced to return money that they were not entitled to, then I see no reason for an exception here. Canadians expect the truth, and they expect those that circumvented the rules to return the money. This government needs to get to the bottom of this scandal, and it's time to give Canadians what they want. They want accountability from this government. They want to see what is in these documents that the Liberals wish to hide so desperately from the public. And Canadians cannot wait for the chance to bring back responsible governance to the true north, strong and free. We owe it to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. Je reconnais l'honorable député Denis Pienne.
The honourable member for Nepean. Questions and comments.
Member for his speech. He's a former math and physics teacher. I wish I could ask him the questions regarding the quality of math and physics education in our school system today, and which, in my opinion, our students are falling behind in math and physics compared to their counterparts in many other parts of the world, and how it is affecting our competitiveness in the global knowledge-based economy. I want to acknowledge that the member speech was less with the political rhetoric compared to many of his colleagues, though I disagree with many of the things he said. Specifically, I would like to ask the member that, being a member of Public Accounts Committee, I also share with him the respect that we both have for the Office of Auditor General. Auditor General has expressed the concern on the blurring of the powers between different parts of the government, and RCMP has specifically said in the letter to Law Clerk of the House of Commons that is very unlikely that they can use the records that this motion would provide to them in their investigation.
Honorable député de Red Deer.
The honourable member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Much, and I've certainly enjoyed time on Industry Committee and other committees that I've sat with the honourable member. And when he speaks about math and science education, I do remember when we were in Centre Block that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom had come and had spoken, and he had said that the greatest mathematics and mathematicians that he had seen in the English-speaking world was actually from Alberta. And as I had just come from teaching there, I was pretty proud of it, although I certainly didn't suggest I was going to take any credit for that. But to get to the point about the Auditor General and the responsibility that they have, I think it's very important that we respect the rulings that they are dealing with, and we go from there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. Je reconnais l'honorable député.
The honourable member for Edmonton Griesbach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Colleague for his very passionate speech of accountability, financial accountability. New Democrats often are found in this interesting position where we strive for financial accountability. No matter what government is in place, the Conservatives, it seems that they only care about financial accountability when it means scoring partisan points. But an interesting part of his speech, he mentions Liberal insider, which I'm sure he's referring to Ms. Verteuren, the former chair of SDTC, who was kicking back millions of dollars to her own company. This individual happens to have donated to the Conservative Party for almost her entire time as chair of SDTC, maxing out donations to the Conservative Party. How much money does the member think Ms. Verteuren donated in total to the Conservative Party that she was maybe or likely getting during the time that she was chair of SDTC?
The honourable member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Well, I thank the member for his question, but he's somewhat mistaken. It is true that as a Cape Bretoner that there were Liberal candidates that she had supported, but if you want to take a look at her most recent donations, they were in fact to the Liberal Party, but that's fine. It's what you do when you have power that counts, and that is the key component here. Sometimes people suggest that, that there's this great money in politics and so on and so forth. What is it, $1,600 is the maximum. It's not like you can get big money from companies and so on. So that isn't the point particularly. It's what you do when you have an appointment. And the appointment and what was done, that's where the problem lies.
Questions and comments? The honourable member.
You and the chair this afternoon. Appreciate what you do. To my honourable colleague, both in profession and here as an MP, I think we both remember, and some of us a little bit longer in the tooth, remembered the Gomery Commission. And I think we spent considerable time talking about the lost 40 million, till finally the media paid attention. Finally, there was the Gomery Commission. But this is many, many more times significant than that. It is many more dollars, and it's not just this one, but there's many. So to my colleague who knows this history, and I know he is an ethical gentleman and believes in honesty, how would he respond to the question of the significance of the amount of money that we're talking about at this issue?
The honourable member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Colleague for the question, and of course, when we're looking at nearly $400 million that is questionable, and you realize that it is done without following the rules, it puts every dollar that is given by SDTC in question. And that, I think, is the sad part of all of this, is that everyone has been painted with this tainted brush. And as I had mentioned in my remarks, I'm a firm believer in innovation. I think that that's how we can go. We've lost so much of our advantage in innovation over these last number of years. So when we take away the trust, and this government has been allowed to take away the trust, that's where the problem lies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
If you take a look at the essence of the issue, you have the Conservative Party saying that they want all documents unredacted handed directly over to the RCMP. The former law clerk has said that that is an abuse of power. An abuse of power is the games that the Conservatives are playing, and they completely sidestep it. It reminds me of when Stephen Harper, the only prime minister that was held in contempt of Parliament. And now you have the Conservative Party abusing power from an opposition point of view. Is there any Conservative member that does not understand that they are abusing power and they're ignoring the recommendations or concerns, I should say, with respect from the RCMP? Fairly well-recognized institution here in Canada. It's a disgrace with the Conservative Party and the games they're playing today.
The honourable member for Red Deer Mountain View.
the point that he tries to make about contempt of Parliament, and I was there. I was in each of the different, it would go to the different committees, and this is one of the issues you have when you're in a minority government where people do not support you. And so they would come up with different concepts or different motions in every one of the committees until they felt they had a critical mass, and then they said, oh, now let's try and take that to the House. It was all a game that was played by opposition parties at that time, but look what happened after that. Finally got ourselves a majority government.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Griesbach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just admitted the fact that the Conservatives want to play games with this issue. The Bloc Québécois and New Democrats have been consistent in our message that we need to see financial transparency in regards to the very serious allegations and very serious issues present in the Auditor General's report. We know that these documents have an incredible amount of information that can shed light on a very important and credible issue. I take issue, Mr. Speaker, with what the member just answered, which was the fact that the committee structure in this House and the play that the Conservatives are trying to utilize here, and was one that the member himself has experience with when he was in government. Mr. Speaker, can the member speak to why he thinks these games are so often occurring in this place when an issue so serious as financial accountability?
L'honorable député a 50 secondes pour répondre.
I think, I'm not quite sure where he felt that there was an admission of games being played, but I was commenting on the reality when the government has all of the other parties against them, which could happen under these circumstances. We don't see that with the NDP because they oscillate back and forth. We have the same situation sometimes with the Bloc. It becomes sort of a tag team thing, so I'm going to support you, the government this time, and I'm going to do that. So we keep the government in place. So I think the government of the day feels pretty comfortable in the position that they're at. When all three are against you, it's a little different.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Parry Sound Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, with great power comes great responsibility. We'll recognize this expression from the wise words of advice Uncle Ben gave to a young Peter Parker in relation to his alter ego, Spider-Man. And while this proverb has certainly been popularized again in the modern era by Spider-Man comics, its meaning is found throughout human history, such as the tale of the sword hanging by a single hair over the head of Damocles while King Dionysus permitted him to experience being king for a day. Not only a powerful mantra for everyday living, it's fitting for the situation we find ourselves in here in the House of Commons today, and the motion that we've been debating for the past several days. What an immense privilege and responsibility it is to sit in this place, to be sent here by your neighbors to our nation's capitals, to be their voice in the halls of power. This Westminster system is unlike any other form of government. This is the House of Commons, where the common citizen is chosen by other common citizens to be sent here to represent them. The government of the day, the Prime Minister, the Privy Council, ministers, deputy ministers, assistant deputy ministers, thousands of bureaucrats. Canadians may well believe that they have power. But in the Westminster system, quite the opposite is true. Everyday citizens of Canada hold the power through the people they send to this House of the common people. You are the boss, and we in this place, we are your servants who sit in your chair for a very brief moment in the long arc of history. This is parliamentary supremacy, a term that is not often used outside of academia, but what does it mean? Why does parliamentary supremacy matter to the marine mechanic in Point of Barrel, or the cranberry farmer in Bala, or the server in South River? Well, Mr. Speaker, it matters to them because it means that they hold the power, and that collectively the members in this place who represent them are far more powerful than any cabinet minister or even a prime minister. We are the people's voice, and the people's voice is supreme. A majority of citizen representatives in this House of the People has demanded the production of documents related to a $390 million spending scandal of this government's making. And yet, despite that parliamentary supremacy, the government, the cabinet, and the Prime Minister have quite simply refused. Speaker, this is not even the first time this Liberal government has ignored an order from the people's representatives to produce documents. Canadians may well remember the Winnipeg lab document scandal. Parliament ordered documents released pertaining to Canada's top infectious disease laboratory where two scientists were intentionally working to benefit the Chinese Communist regime. The government fought to keep those documents hidden from the people, ignoring orders and even taking the former Speaker of this very House to court to hide the truth, not just from us in this House of Commons, but from all Canadians. Now, there can be no dispute that oftentimes in this place we exchange partisan jabs in question period, can be a very raucous affair with heckling and plenty of theatrics. But in certain circumstances, there comes a matter so fundamental to the functioning of this House, a matter so fundamental to the rights of Canadians, those citizens who sent us here to speak for them, that we must hit the pause on the regular business of this place to protect the very purpose of this place and the rights of the Canadians who sent us here. So how did we get here? Well, in 2001, the government of Stephen Harper created an organization that would, quote, demonstrate new technologies to promote sustainable development, including technologies to address issues related to climate change and the quality of air, water, and soil. This organization was to be a funder of public-private partnerships to commercialize new green technologies. It was called Sustainable Development Technology Canada. And since its creation, it has invested in over 300 projects all across the country. A great idea that worked very well. That is, until this current Liberal government was elected. In 2017, just before the current government took office, the Auditor General reviewed Sustainable Development Technology Canada and delivered a very positive report indicating that the organization was operating appropriately. Well, then, late in 2018, then Industry Minister Navdeep Bains started to complain about the chair. Jim Balsillie was his name, a chair who was leading the organization well, according to the Auditor General. Well, Minister Bains complained that Mr. Balsillie had been critical of some government legislation. Imagine. So in 2019, Minister Bains began appointing Liberal friends and insiders to the Board of Directors of Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Now, it's important to note here that Sustainable Development Technology Canada was not some independent agency and completely independent from the government. I mean, the Minister of Industry appoints the board, right? So it's not independent completely. And there were several staff from the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada that would regularly sit in on meetings and monitor the activities of the board. And then Minister Bains appointed Annette Verscharan, someone who was receiving Sustainable Development Technology Canada funding through one of her companies, to be the new chair of the board. Well, immediately the red flag should go up. We have a new chair of Sustainability Development Technology Canada, the steward of this fund, the person who is tapped to oversee its operations, to hand out money, who herself is a recipient of the same money she was supposed to be watching over. Well, it turns out the red flags did go up, Mr. Speaker. Then Minister Bains, the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, all were warned. They were all told of the risks associated with appointing this conflicted chair. Now, in an alternate universe where Canadians had a competent government that was accountable and responsible and followed the rules, an appointment like this would never have been made in the first place. Of course, that's not what happened, because Canadians don't have a competent, responsible government. We have a scandal-plagued, incompetent Liberal government that has proven time and time again that every issue they tackle, they make it worse, and that the interests of their well-connected friends and supporters, or the interests of those close to them, always come before the interests of Canadians. We saw it in the WE scandal, WE Charity. Friends of the Liberal Party were quietly and quickly awarded a government contract worth $40 million. Well, quietly until the member from Carleton found out and started digging. So in June of 2019, Minister Bains, after having received some sound advice that appointing an individual to lead a public fund whose companies benefit from that fund was a bad idea, ignored the advice and appointed her anyhow. So did this new chair implement radical change in culture? Did she lead with integrity and honor to ensure that conflicts of interest between public funds and private interests didn't occur? Absolutely not. In fact, the new Liberal board chair went on to create a corporate environment where conflicts of interest were not just merely tolerated, they're actually facilitated. Other members of the board went on to award public money, Canadians' money, to companies in which board members held stock or leadership positions. Now, I think it's important for everyone to understand what conflict of interest means. The Oxford Dictionary describes it this way. It's a situation in which a person is in a position to derive personal benefit from actions or decisions made in their official capacity. In this case, Liberal board members' individual interests were enriched by their actions in their professional and their public duties. That's a problem, and Canadians understand that. You can forgive the average Canadian who's not likely as familiar with the fancy boardrooms that Liberal insiders frequent, but it is not really that complicated to excuse yourself, to remove yourself from situations where you are or are perceived to be in a conflict of interest. And it's a perfectly legitimate action to take. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it's the law. There are simple and straightforward procedures to avoid a conflict of interest. It's the honorable thing to do. It is an act of integrity, of being faithful to your public role and your solemn responsibility to the citizens of this country, whose money you are spending and whose trust you must strive to earn every single day. But the Liberal insiders on the Sustainable Development Technology Canada board didn't care about that public trust. They didn't care about honor or integrity. Even more galling, Mr. Speaker, is that these dishonorable Liberals did it all out in the open. So arrogant and pleased with their self-enrichment at the expense of the Canadian taxpayer, they didn't even try to hide their corruption. Officials from Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada witnessed 186 conflicts at the board, but were apparently powerless to do anything about it. Well, that is until November of 2022, when heroic whistleblowers raised their concerns about the goings-on at Sustainable Development Technology Canada with the Auditor General. What did those whistleblowers say when they appeared at a parliamentary committee? One quote, "I don't think the goal and mandate of the Auditor General's office is to actually look into criminality. I'm not surprised by the fact that they haven't found anything criminal because they're not looking at intent. If their investigation was focused on intent, of course, they would find the criminality." They went on to say, "I know the federal government, like the minister, has continued saying that there was no criminal intent and nothing was found. But I think that the committee would agree that they're not to be trusted on this situation. Whatever the findings are by the RCMP, but I would say that I wouldn't trust that there isn't any criminality unless the RCMP is given full authority to investigate." The whistleblowers went further at committee, saying, "Again, if you bring in the RCMP and they do their investigation and they find something or they don't, I think the public would be happy with that. But I don't think we should leave it to the current federal government or the ruling party to make these decisions. Let the public see what's there." And just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement at Sustainability Development Technologies Canada, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization. And finally, I think that the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation being a public nightmare, and they would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like this SDTC and the public.
Je m'excuse auprès de l'honorable député.
Apologies. The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte is rising on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, there's this strange background noise. I keep hearing a sort of rushing noise. And I am a parliamentarian. I would like to hear the speech. I'd like to thank the member. I did not hear that noise. I would call on all colleagues to remain quiet and listen to the member speaking instead of having discussions on the floor of the House. The honourable member for Parry Sound Muskoka has 8 minutes, 30 seconds remaining.
Canada launched a thorough investigation that revealed widespread conflicts of interest, corruption, and abuse of Canadians' hard-earned dollars at Sustainable Development Technology Canada. On June 10th of this year, this House, by a vote of 171 to 50, that's a majority, the members adopted a motion calling for the production of documents from Sustainability Development Technology Canada to be turned over to the RCMP. Well, how did the government respond to an order from the people's voice? Well, departments either outright refused to comply or heavily redacted and blacked out relevant documents that the people demanded. There was nothing in the people's order to allow for any redactions. The people have demanded the truth, and they want the RCMP to be able to investigate the misuse and abuse of their dollars. It's been the talk of the Ottawa bubble these days, the Constitution Act, the Parliament Act, the Parliament of Canada Act, or parliamentary privilege, the privilege of this House. Imagine that, as we sit in these hallowed chambers surrounded by deferential security guards, that we could be debating our privileges as members. There are Canadians out there who are hungry, Canadians worried about how they're going to pay to heat their homes as the winter sets in. But our privileges have been breached. But really, it's not our privilege, it's the right of Canadians to know what their own government is up to. Our fathers of Confederation gave that power to the people, to their representatives who sit in this place. It's not because I'm a member of Parliament that I believe I have the privilege to access these documents. It's because the people who we all represent, they have that right. And yes, they have tasked us in this House. And as a House, we have a powerful ability to exercise that right, an absolute and unfettered ability to exercise that right. And so why did the House feel documents? It has everything to do with the Auditor General's findings. We found that 82% of transactions involving payment from Sustainable Development Technology Canada to companies approved by the Board of Directors were conflicted. 82%. According to the Auditor General, $300 million of Canadians' money was given to companies where the board members who voted to reward those companies had a conflict of interest. $300 million of public money being used to fund private interests of the people who were voting to award the funds. Speaker, it is reasonable to think that this scandal goes deeper. In the 5-year period under examination by the Auditor General, there were 405 transactions approved by the board. The Auditor General looked at 226, so just over half of the transaction. 186 transactions of the 226 she examined were conflicted. So we can assume that the ratio stands for the entire package of 405 transactions. The Auditor General also found that the same Liberal-appointed board approved and funded another $58 million of projects that were outside the mandate of the Foundation. They weren't even eligible under their own rules, but the Liberal board gave them the money anyhow. Now, the Liberals would have us believe that this is an example of bureaucracy off track. But the Auditor General made it clear that the blame for this scandal falls on the Prime Minister's industry minister, who, I quote, did not sufficiently monitor the contracts that were given to well-connected Liberal insiders. Speaker, what we have here is not just gross mismanagement, it's corruption and blatant conflict of interest by Liberal appointees to the tune of $300 million. There was abuse of the public purse, a personal enrichment under the guise of helping the environment. Once these companies that were connected to Liberal insiders received these government grants, it was seen as a seal of approval by outside financiers. This allowed the companies to go and collect millions more dollars to further their interests. It was a green slush fund for well-connected Liberals. Canadians' money was mishandled and private interests got in the way, once again, of the public good. It would be reasonable to conclude that we are debating yet another Liberal spending scandal. Reasonable because there have been so many Liberal spending scandals. It's tough to keep up. It would be understandable if some believe that we're engaged in some self-serving debate about members of Parliament, privilege. In truth, Mr. Speaker, this debate, this motion of privilege that has halted all the other work of this House, is about the very foundations of our democracy and the right of citizens of this country to know what their government is doing. That sword of Damocles hangs over the head of this government. It hangs precariously over the Liberal government and their ministers who on so many occasions arrogantly operate as though they are above the law, as though they are above the people. While Conservatives will never relent in exposing the corruption of this country, and we will never relent in our solemn duty to be the voice of the people in this House, their House, where we defend their rights, and above the rights of Liberal insiders and above the rights of Liberal cabinet ministers, and most certainly above the rights of a Liberal Prime Minister. The citizens of Canada, through this, their House of Commons, the people have demanded the truth, all of it. It's time for this government to hand it over. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, let me read verbatim a couple very important quotes. The first one's from the RCMP, signed by the Commissioner. And I quote, "There is significant risk that the motion could be interpreted as a circumvention of normal investigative processes and charter protections." It's talking about the Charter of Rights and the Conservative motion, Mr. Speaker. The next quote from the former law clerk, again, independent individual, Mr. Speaker. And I really ask the member to listen to this part. "It is an abuse of its powers." I'm going to repeat that again. "It is an abuse of its powers for the House to use its power to demand and get documents from the government in order to transfer them to a third party, RCMP, that wouldn't otherwise receive them, or to compel the government to give documents to the third party." The Conservative game that we're playing right now says, let's get this information direct to the RCMP. The RCMP, the Auditor General, former law clerk, former Deputy Commissioner, who are the advisors of the Conservative Party today?
L'honorable député de Paris-Centre-Muskoka.
The Honourable Member for Paris-Sound-Muskoka.
The answer to that member's question is quite simple. The people of Canada are our advisors. Parliament is supreme, based on them sending us here. A majority of people in this, members in this House have demanded these documents. Hand them over.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, we all agree that we have the right to those documents, and we all agree, it goes without saying, that parliamentary privilege was breached. But there's an important question in substance. So I want to make sure I understand. Here's my question to my colleague. Now, there is suspected or confirmed misdeed. So does the colleague disagree, though, with the subsidies which help businesses with the green transition? I do want to understand the Conservatives' stance on that.
As I said in my earlier comments, I think that the concept behind this Sustainable Development Technology Canada Fund was good. It made sense. In fact, it was a very wise and competent Prime Minister that put it in place, Stephen Harper. So I don't disagree with that. What I disagree with is Liberal corruption and insiders enriching themselves over the benefit of Canadians as a whole.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Griesbach. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
My colleague for his speech. Part of what we've heard in the last many days on this issue in particular is this idea that these are Liberal insiders. This is a Liberal Conservative insider, as a matter of fact. Mr. Speaker, we've pointed out many, many times that she, Ms. Verteuren, the former chair of SDTC, has donated to both the Liberals and Conservatives during her nearly entire stint as chair of SDDC, pushing money back to her own company, pushing back money to Conservative campaigns, pushing back money to the Conservative Party. Can the member promise Canadians that should the Conservatives form a government that they won't allow Ms. Verteuren back into this place? And will they ban donations from her to their party?
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I can assure the member opposite is that yes, we would, as a Conservative government, which the country is so desperate for, we will make sure that Liberal corruption, Liberal conflicts of interest will be a thing of the past. We'll clean up this mess. We'll fix the budget. We'll clean up the fiscal mess here in Ottawa, and we will get this country moving again.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
And to my honourable colleague, I'm wondering if he can speak a little bit to how incredibly egregious this is, where you've got 186 conflicts of interest that the Auditor General had determined in her audit, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. And in fact, the audit did not even go through all of the contracts. It was just over half of the contracts. Where approximately 85% of them were found to have conflicts of interest. So I'm wondering if the member can just speak to how massive this is and how important this is, and how, in fact, the Liberals are they just seem to be okay with not wanting all of this information to come to light and to be turned over unredacted.
L'honorable député de Parry Sound Muskoka.
I want to thank my colleague for the question. She describes it quite accurately. It is massive. But Mr. Speaker, I come from a lifetime of municipal politics, and of course in municipal law, municipal government, a conflict of interest is an incredibly serious thing. You can be removed from office for a conflict of interest. And you can be removed from office for a conflict of interest because representing the people is a sacred trust. And any single conflict of interest is a breach of that trust. It is a betrayal of the people who you represent, who you serve. And to imagine hundreds of conflicts of interest and a minister who appoints somebody to chair the board who was actually warned, don't do this, they are in conflict. He didn't care. He broke that sacred trust.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Did you know the greatest defender of Stephen Harper was actually the current leader of the Conservative Party? Stephen Harper is the only Prime Minister in Canadians' history held in contempt of Parliament. Is there any wonder why the Conservative leader does not have a problem in terms of listening to what it is that the independent RCMP are saying, the independent Auditor General of Canada, the former Deputy Clerk of the House of Commons or the Parliament, Mr. Speaker? Is there any reason why Canadians should believe that the Conservatives are doing anything more than just a political game, a gimmick at a great expense, because they don't have any problems walking over the charter rights of individuals, Mr. Speaker. And that is the bottom line. This is more politics for the Conservatives than it is concerns for Canadians. And I say shame to the Conservative Party of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Parry Sound Muskoka.
Well, as entertaining as the rantings of that member are, I must say that, you know, he stands in his house every single day and defends a Prime Minister that's twice been convicted of breaking ethics laws. That's right. I don't know how he can stand there with a straight face and continue to defend a corrupt government where scandal after scandal after scandal, whether it's a spending scandal, whether it's an ethics scandal, this government thinks that they are above the law. They think they're above the supremacy of this Parliament. This Parliament said, hand over the papers, hand over the documents. And he thinks he knows better. And so he's going to try to lecture us and defend a corrupt Prime Minister who's been twice convicted of ethics scandals. That's the shame.
The honourable member from Edmonton Griesbach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And for those who are tuning into this debate, it's very clear to see that between the extreme issues present to the current Liberal government, the serious mismanagement of funds and SDTs, or whether it's at the historic contempt case of the former Conservative government, these parties are consistently abusing Canadians. They're abusing Canadians' ability to get things done in this House. They're abusing Canadians' tax dollars. And when it becomes convenient for them to call out each other's mismanagement, it becomes then politically convenient for them in this place. It shouldn't have to be that way, Mr. Speaker. New Democrats always believe in financial accountability and financial transparency. That's why we voted in favor of this motion. But we can't help but point out the direct hypocrisy between the two parties that we've just witnessed in this debate and their complete lack of memory when it comes to their own mismanagement. The member agree that a serious debate on this issue should require reflection of one's own actions, in particular the issues that were present, not just to this government, but that of Mr. Harper's.
The honourable member from Parry Sound Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, it's comical. It's hard to take that member seriously. He has voted consistently for 4 years to support this corrupt government. He'll stand in here and tell them, oh, they're horrible, they're this, they're bad. His leader stood up and ripped up their agreement. The marriage is over. Oh, my goodness, because they're so corrupt, they're so bad, they're so evil. And they still vote every single time in here to support them and continue their corruption. I can't take you seriously.
The Honourable, there is not enough time for questions and answers. So, reprise ce débat, resuming debate. The Honourable Member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, we have breaking news, and it comes from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And this is, of course, dealing with this matter, this latest $400 million scandal facing this Liberal government. And the RCMP confirms that they are investigating this $400 million scandal of this Liberal Prime Minister that has paralyzed Parliament. But they also confirm that they have and are using the documents that have so far been turned over by the parliamentary law clerk. So this, of course, raises questions about, well, why was the government willing to turn over some of the documents, yet some departments refused outright? Some departments have said they're not even a part of the government, which is, of course, an absolutely incredible statement to hear from them. Now, I want to reference another bit of information about redacted records, or the absence of them. Now, the list of departments that didn't comply are typed in a very small typeface on this 11 by 17 sheet of paper, but one in particular stands out. It's the Department of Justice. More than 10,000 pages that they are not turning over. Why won't this Prime Minister's DOJ turn over these documents to the cops? What is so damning inside them that while the RCMP confirms they have some of the documents, these Liberals and their co-conspirators aren't prepared to turn over the rest? What's in these documents? Canadians have a right to know. And as a matter of fact, that Liberal government has a legal obligation to turn them over. Now, it's not because I said so. It's because in Canada, we have a democracy, and a majority of democratically elected MPs used the powers that have been bestowed on this House of Commons to ensure that of public interest, that the production of papers is absolute and it is unrestricted. Now, what could be more important to the institution of Parliament, to the protection of our democracy, than to make sure that when there's a matter involving more than 180 conflicts of interest, $400 million in this corruption scandal overseen by that Liberal Prime Minister and all of the Liberals who have stood up today, especially the Parliamentary Secretary who's clocked over 100 minutes in this saga that has paralyzed Parliament. Why won't they turn over those documents that are so important so that Canadians can get answers? Now, are we looking to be the judge, jury, and executioner in this place? No, we want to turn it over to the RCMP. And are the RCMP going to investigate because we told them to? No, the RCMP is investigating because they have reasonable grounds to believe that an offense under the criminal code has been committed, that it's in the public interest for them to investigate it, and they'll lay a charge if they believe that there's a reasonable prospect of conviction. Is that why? Is that why these Liberals are withholding all of these documents from all of these many departments? From the Atlantic Canadian Opportunity Agency, they're too afraid to turn over documents. Canada Revenue Agency, the Canada Northern Economic Development Agency, Foreign Affairs, Department of Housing, National Defence, National Resources, and on and on and on it goes. 10,000 pages alone from the Department of Justice. Now, we've seen before these Liberals what happens when the RCMP, they've said, well, what, normally we've heard the Justice Minister stand up and say, well, they'll get a production order, just knock on the door and say, turn over the documents. But the thing is about this Liberal government and that Liberal Prime Minister, the one who's been found guilty of breaking the law twice himself, along with his Public Safety Minister, found to have broken the law. The Small Business Minister broke the law. So with that as the context, when the RCMP came in and knocked on his door, that Prime Minister's door in a case of a criminal matter, oh, they said they couldn't turn over the documents because of cabinet confidence. So this is what's going to happen. This is the game that they want to play. They want this to go to committee, they say. But why? Is that because the documents will be tabled with the committee? No, it's to study the question of if the documents should be tabled. The House already ordered the production of the documents. So that's done. That's done. A majority of democratically elected members. Not one party with a minority of seats in this House and shrinking returns in every election and evaporating public support. That's not who gets to decide. The majority of democratically elected members, that's who. And that decision's been made. They must turn over the documents because it's the law. But that doesn't concern these Liberals or that Attorney General. Because what they want this to go to committee. And they want the police to come and say, hey, can you turn over those documents? You said if we brought a search warrant that you'd provide them. Sorry, we're afraid it's cabinet confidence. Here's those 10,000 pages heavily redacted. That's the game that they're playing with our democracy. Makes you wonder if they're prepared to violate this law, what other laws will these Liberals break? We've seen some broken, as I said before, by the Prime Minister, by the Public Safety Minister, by the Small Business Minister. And these Liberals, when they got tired of being found guilty for breaking Canada's Conflict of Interest Act, the laws that are supposed to protect, exactly the kind of thing that led to $400 million in corruption in this latest expense scandal. They got tired of getting caught, so they appointed the Public Safety Minister, who he had been found guilty, of course, of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act and clam scam, awarding lucrative contracts to his family members. Again, Liberal insiders, always their priority. They appointed his sister-in-law to be the Ethics Commissioner. Well, how convenient would that be? Thanksgiving dinner this weekend. Hey, nice to see you. Could you pass the stuffing? Also, could you look the other way on this latest conflict of interest affecting the Liberals? That's what they're cooking up this Thanksgiving weekend. But the production of these documents was ordered by the House. They, of course, wanted to go to committee to bury it. Now, the amendment and sub-amendment put forward are extremely reasonable. The list of witnesses that we would want to testify to provide fulsome answers to committee is incredibly important. But we would be faced with another problem when we get there. And we will get to a point where the House can vote for this to go to committee. Once we've had the opportunity to have this debate, but then we're going to deal with another issue affecting their government, further paralyzing Parliament. And that deals with the Employment Minister, this Liberal Prime Minister's minister from Edmonton, who, along with his pandemic profiteering business partner, have this unbelievable scandal that has seen a ruling from you, Speaker, about the rights of democratically elected members to get fulsome, honest answers and information from individuals that are sent for by this place. Again, a right of this House to send for people, to send for papers. And in that case, the individual, the business partner of the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre, refused to provide information on who, quote, other Randy is. Now, we need to know that information because it strikes at the heart of a matter that's incredibly important to Canadians. We learned that the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre, his business, while he's serving in cabinet, of which he owned a 50% share, was awarded a contract by his own government. Well, that's not okay. But what makes it worse is that the minister said he hadn't been in contact with his business partner for all of 2022 in particular. Why is 2022 important? Because his business partner said the minister hadn't been in touch with him either for that year. Okay, well, we'll take the minister at his word, case closed, right? Unfortunately, you can trust them as far as you can throw them. We demanded the production of papers, again, one of those rights that we have. And what did we learn? They were texting and they were talking. Why is that a problem? One, because what he said wasn't the truth. What the witness said, his business partner, Mr. Anderson, wasn't the truth. What they told the newspaper wasn't the truth. But it also means that a sitting member of the Liberal cabinet was directing the day-to-day business affairs of his company that was netting Government of Canada contracts worth tens of thousands of dollars. To say nothing of the fact that the service they provided was, as I said, pandemic profiteering. These were like the guys during the pandemic who would go to Costco, buy up all the toilet paper, and then sell it out of their van at the end of the parking lot for an inflated price. But instead of just the people in their community who were the victims, they victimized people across Canada getting contracts from all kinds of governments with the name of a sitting cabinet minister as the co-owner of this business. So that's what they've been doing. That's the matter that this House is, the matters this House is seized with, paralyzed by, and it all has to do with conflicts of interest and refusing to follow the law, orders of Parliament. So if Canadians have to follow the law, why don't these Liberals? Why don't these Liberals? And I do get asked often by Canadians. They want to know why it is the RCMP won't finally investigate. And here we have a letter from the Commissioner of the RCMP dated October the 9th. And it reads in part that I wish to inform you that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigation into SDTC is ongoing. Now, SDTC, Sustainable Development Technologies Canada, which operated under governments of different stripes up until 2017 with a clean bill of health from Canada's Auditor General. So Stephen Harper absolutely oversaw this fund. You know, you hear the Liberals say Conservatives don't want to take any action on environment. Here we are with this clean tech business with $1 billion of Canadian tax money, looking to help startups and innovators in the clean tech space. We think it's incredibly important that we solve issues facing our environment, facing our climate with technology, not a tax on everything that we know that in my province of Ontario is going to cost families $1,400 more than they get back in the fake phony rebates that these Liberals talk up. So we have this fund, SDTC, Clean Bill of Health by the Auditor General up to 2017. But it's after that when the trouble sets in. This Liberal Prime Minister appoints his choice, a Liberal chair of the fund. Well, guess what happened? The Liberal Prime Minister found guilty of breaking ethics laws twice. What do you think happened when he put his hand-picked selection in his chair? Well, here come the conflicts of interest, 186 of them, and $400 million that we know about. This is really important because the Auditor General didn't look into 100% of the deals done and the votes cast at the billion-dollar slush fund. But of the cases they looked into, the Auditor General and her army of auditors found that there were conflicts in 80% of them. 80%. There's no other organization in the world that when they find out that one of their subsidiaries is rife with corruption and alleged criminality, that they say, well, we're not going to turn over the documents to the RCMP. We're not going to call the cops. We're going to call a committee. There's no other organization that would do that unless they've got something to hide. What do they have to hide? Well, I think we know. It's all the things they don't want the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to see. They're worried that the King's Cowboys are going to ride in and find all kinds of dirty deals with Liberal insiders getting rich while Canadians were lined up at food banks in record numbers. It's StatsCan. StatsCan this week said that income inequality in this country has reached a point never seen before since they started measuring it in the history of our country. It's StatsCan who said that 1 in 4 Canadians don't know where their next meals are going to come from. And I think that that's really important because the unemployment rate in this country isn't 25% or 1 in 4. So that means that you have millions of Canadians who are going to work, and in between the shift at their first job and the start of their shift at their second job, they've got to make a stop at the food bank so they can afford to feed themselves and their children. That's life after 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister. And it's not that they've been spending money to help Canadians get ahead. They've been spending money to make sure that Liberal insiders live large. We saw it with their $60 million Arrive scam. We see it in this case of the $400 million at their Green Slush Fund, Sustainable Development Technologies Canada, which of course, when confronted with the problem, they denied it, and then they folded it only to pull it underneath the industry minister who isn't turning over documents to the police. We saw it when the Prime Minister tried to reward his buddies at the WE organization, Mark and Craig Kielburger. We saw it when he tried to help his friends at SNC Lavalin with a get out of jail free card, and when he got called out by his own Attorney General. How did he treat Ms. Wilson-Raybould, an experienced Crown prosecutor? How did he treat her? He fired her, he threw her under the bus. And when the health minister, an experienced physician, stood up and said what was happening was wrong, what did he do to that second woman in his caucus who spoke out against him? He threw her under the bus too. Because it's all about Liberal insiders. And when he gets a phone call from someone who's getting millions of dollars from his government and says, hey, I've got a big grant that I'm looking for. I'm looking for a couple $1 million. Let's talk about it at my island in the Bahamas. Bring the president of the Liberal Party with you. Why don't you do that too? We can have a nice conversation about that together. Free trip for himself. But who's picking up the tab? It's always Canadians who are stuck with the bill when it comes to this Prime Minister who's helping Liberal insiders and his well-connected friends to get ahead. So the ask is very simple. 1, don't break the law, okay? Looks like they struggled with that one. So the second ask is, now Parliament, which has the legal authority to order the production of these documents, that is a matter of fact. It's not, the parliamentary secretary can stand up and wave his arms and shout about it, but it's the law, it's a fact. He can not like it. And he says he doesn't like the law. We know that about these Liberals. They break the law, they don't like the law, but you know what? We weren't elected to make him happy. We were elected to protect the interests of Canadians who are just struggling to get by. And I've got really good news at the end of what seems like a pretty depressing 20 minutes after a depressing 9 years, is that common sense Conservatives have a promise that we've made to Canadians. And that's that life wasn't like this before that Liberal Prime Minister, and it's not going to be like that after him. We will restore the Canadian promise of bigger paychecks, homes that people can afford in safe neighborhoods, and a comfortable retirement. That's the Canadian dream. That's the Canadian promise. It's why all of us ran for office. It's why we can't wait for there to be a carbon tax election, because Canadians deserve a choice. between 9 years of taxes going up, costs going up, crime is going up, crime having gone up, because now time is up. Canadians are ready for a change, and we're ready to bring it home. Thank you.
Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member started off in terms of the breaking news about the RCMP doing the investigation. And it's interesting, if the Conservatives would only let the RCMP do what it is that they need to do, Mr. Speaker. Instead, they want to blur judicial independence. And that's what this motion, or what it is, this game that the Conservatives are playing, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the RCMP are recommending. But I wanted to take issue with something in which this member, more probably than any other Conservative member, tries to politicize things. How many times do we hear him say, Liberal appointed chair, she's a Liberal, and so on, Liberal friendly? The member knows full well that she was an advisor to Brian Mulroney, she was an advisor to Stephen Harper, she was an advisor to Jim Flaherty, she's a big donor, thousands and thousands of dollars to the Conservative Party. Yet, he continues to say Liberal friendly. The bottom line is, Mr. Speaker, we do not condone. We have taken strict action against what has taken place. Independent investigations, freezing of funds, replacement of board. The only one that's been irresponsible here is the Conservative Party of Canada.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
We know how these Liberals love to speak out of both sides of their mouth. So let me share with Canadians an article from the Globe and Mail, which we know they've called fake news in the past. That Prime Minister has run down honest reporting of his record. But here we have it, September 11th, 2019, Ottawa blocks RCMP on SNC Lavalin inquiry. The RCMP has been looking into potential obstruction of justice in the handling of the prosecution of SNC Lavalin Group, but its examination has been stymied by the federal government's refusal to lift cabinet confidentiality for all witnesses. This is it. This is their game. This is the game that they play. There's no law that they won't break, and no falsehood that they won't offer to cover for what we know they want to do best, and that's to help Liberal insiders get ahead. We're not going to stand for it.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neigette, Témiscouata-les-Basques. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I listened to my colleague's speech and what all the Conservatives are saying, the so-called common sense people, but I think they're lacking in common sense because they're forgetting their history. I agree with them on one point, that corruption really is a part of the Liberal DNA, but it's also in the Conservative DNA. The Conservative is reminding everyone what the facts are, but I'd like to remind him of a few when they were in power. $50 million was misappropriated in the riding of Tony Clement, a former Conservative minister. He was Minister of Industry. And you know what they did, what the Conservative Party did to reward him? They gave him a promotion. It's incredible. So they reward those who misappropriate funds. And then on other facts, the questions of privilege like we're seeing here today, well, the Conservatives disagreed to produce documents that the House demanded. And there was the Afghan detainees in 2010, the Senate spending scandal, the omnibus budget. I think my colleague is forgetting parts of history. My only question for him is, how are Quebecers supposed to trust a Conservative Party with the worst record of such shameful scandals?
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, with arguments like that, it's a real shame that I don't have the opportunity to run against a Bloc Québécois member in my community, because I think Canadians would find that to be pretty flimsy. You know, that member and his party have been propping up a Liberal government that is unrivaled in their corruption, unrivaled. And we've seen it here today with this $400 million scandal. How could anyone supply confidence to a Liberal government with their $60 million Arrive scam? How could anyone in good conscience do that? When people in the province of Quebec, like in every province and territory in our federation, have been suffering, lined up at food banks. The lines at the food banks in Quebec aren't any shorter. And it's a real shame, because there's an opportunity to have a carbon tax election. There's an opportunity to remove confidence from this government. And it's up to that member to make that decision with his caucus if they're going to continue to support a government that certainly hasn't been supporting people in my community, people in my province, or people in my country, which includes Quebec.
Question et commentaire. The honourable member from Kildonan St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened to the commentary from the member of Winnipeg North, who repeatedly said that Conservatives are abusing our powers, or abusing power, he says, which I find very illuminating to the Liberal mindset on this. They believe that us holding the government accountable and exercising the most ancient parliamentary privilege, that is to call for persons, papers, and things, is an abuse of power. I would charge that they are abusing power by defying the order of this House and yourself, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes can comment on his thoughts on that.
And the honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, thanks to the honourable member, my friend from Kildonan St. Paul. She does a tremendous job representing her constituents, and it's no wonder that they sent her to this place because she hit the nail right on the head. This is an absolute abuse of power by the government, but that's been the hallmark of that Liberal Prime Minister, and he's been staunchly defended by the Parliamentary Secretary, the member for Winnipeg North, against the interests of his constituents and all Canadians. And that's when we see that they refuse to follow the law in the interest of supporting their friends. And the example I gave earlier about SNC-Lavalin, when the Prime Minister cooked up a phony story about trying to save jobs when it was really just trying to save his buddies who were giving him big donations, and in fact obstructed a criminal investigation, obstructed an investigation into his obstruction of justice. That shows you what an abuse of power is, and it's been perpetrated by that Liberal Prime Minister and his Liberal members on Canadians for far too long.
That's right.
Question et commentaire. The honourable member from Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not me, the member from Winnipeg North, that is saying alone abuse of power. Let me quote directly. This is from the former law clerk here of Parliament, an independent institution. He is not a partisan. This is what he says. It is an abuse of its powers for the House to use its powers to demand and get documents from the government in order to transfer them to a third party, RCMP, that wouldn't otherwise receive them, or to compel the government to give documents to a third party. It is this individual that says the Conservatives are abusing power. How do they defend that?
Well, member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
I have great news, and that's that the current parliamentary law clerk has affirmed for Canadians that Parliament continues to have the unfettered right to send for persons papers in spite of a Liberal government and a Liberal Prime Minister who wants to trample on the rights of democratically elected members to represent them, to stop the corruption being perpetrated on them. Now, of course, Speaker, you know that because your ruling that the order for the production of documents was valid was informed by the expertise of the current parliamentary law clerk. So the member opposite can find whatever straw men that he wants to prop up in a field, but you know what we have here is an institution with the parliamentary law clerk who has asserted that the right remains intact, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police who are investigating their corruption. I think it's about time they come out with their hands up.
A quick 30-second question from the honourable member from Caribou, Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the hypocrisy that is coming from the other side is mind-blowing. Through you to our honourable colleague from Leeds, Grenville. He started off by saying breaking news with the RCMP, which the Liberals have asserted throughout the whole debate that the RCMP want nothing to do with this. And then the member across the way said, well, listen, if only the Conservatives weren't doing what they're doing, the RCMP could do their job. Are you kidding me, Mr. Speaker? The hypocrisy, the talking points are changing on the fly. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to our honourable colleague, I hope he can wrap up and just highlight some more of the hypocrisy that's coming from the Liberals.
The honourable member has 15 seconds.
Well, it's a great question from the honourable member for Caribou Prince George. Great to see him because he raises a great point. It's hypocrisy from these Liberals. The RCMP is investigating their corruption after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. Canadians have had enough. It's time for a carbon tax election.
Resuming debate, the honourable member from Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to be able to rise and speak in this chamber, but not happy about the occasion. We are talking today about yet another example of the culture of secrecy that has penetrated this government. Actually, it really was baked in right from the start. And that's the shame of it, Mr. Speaker. Many Canadians are old enough to remember the 2015 election campaign, where this government promised to be the most open and transparent government in Canadian history. And the shame of this is how they have flagrantly broken that promise every day of this Parliament.
Every day.
This is a government that is just reflexively secretive in all things and scandal prone from the start. Just going back to their promise of openness and transparency, just to set part of the stage here. I mean, this is a government that passed an access to information law after it was first elected that the Information Commissioner said was a step backward in access to information. They promised, and in no small part, succeeded in that 2015 election. They figured out how to eat the NDP's lunch and how to go after traditional NDP supporters. Many members of the NDP, to their credit, had long spoken about openness and transparency and had criticized access to information over the decades in Canada. That was one of the promises where the Liberals zeroed in on a group of voters, promised them what they wanted to hear, and then broke the promise. And this attitude of reflexive and instinctive secrecy governs every bit of conduct of this government. We've seen it time and time and time and time again. This government is a scandal-plagued government that does not regard, that has no regard for our laws around ethics and around access to information. One of the early on in this government, let's not forget that the Prime Minister broke the law and accepted an illegal vacation. That was one of the first things he did, and became the first Prime Minister to be found to contravene the Conflict of Interest Act. It wasn't long after that. This is the type of scandal we see from this government over and over and over again. But a year after that, it's everything from the India trip, wherein this government took a man convicted of terrorism, convicted of the attempted murder of an Indian cabinet minister, and who had assaulted a former premier of British Columbia and member. This is the company that this government keep. We saw early in the 42nd Parliament the SNC-Lavalin scandal, wherein the Prime Minister brought in a new law, snuck it into a budget implementation bill. I was at the Finance Committee. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you were there too, I recall, where they snuck in a deferred prosecution law into a budget implementation act. And we scratched our head at the Finance Committee and said, what is this doing in a budget implementation act? Even you, Speaker, and other Liberals that were around the table were wondering about this. Well, it was implemented into law, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly why that deferred prosecution law was brought in. It was brought in to get a corrupt company off the hook in further the interest, in his own words, for the member from Papineau, who said this was why it was essential that this company, this corrupt company, be granted a deferred prosecution, something hand-delivered to that company for that purpose by this government in a Budget Implementation Act. And the fallout, what we saw from that was the fallout that resulted in cabinet resignations, caucus expulsions, the retirement of the chief clerk of the Privy Council. We saw, and it's to the credit of Jody Wilson-Raybould, who stood up to this government and said, this kind of greasy corruption will not be allowed to stand, that I will not allow the Prime Minister and his office to interfere in a criminal prosecution. This is what happened, and she was fired as Minister of Justice, shuffled, then dumped and expelled from the Liberal caucus. We have a government where the then Fisheries Minister tried to give a fishing license, a lucrative clam fishing license, to a relative. Thank you, and thanks to my friend behind me, the member from Caribou Prince George, for bringing that to light. And so this is all in the 42nd Parliament. You know, this is right back from the beginning. So we come back into the 43rd Parliament, much reduced numbers on the other side, in no small part to these this kind of dishonest conduct. They pick up right where they left off and hand $500 million over to a friendly but ultimately discredited charity, under the WE scandal, where the conflicts of interest of the then Finance Minister and Bill Morneau and his ties to that organization ultimately led to his resignation. We saw the Winnipeg's Labs scandal emerged in the 43rd Parliament, where the Speaker, where this Parliament found this government in contempt over its refusal then to table documents that were for which the production was ordered by this House. Elected members of Parliament who have the right under the Constitution of Canada, we have the Charter, which guarantees the democratic rights of Canadians, and the Constitution of Canada, which declares that this inquisitor for Canadians, that members of this Parliament have the right to documents and to compel witnesses in furtherance of holding the Crown, holding the government to account to Canadians. And so the refusal to table documents dealing with the espionage that had occurred in a top secret laboratory, that they be tabled in this House of Commons, and the Speaker we had to order the chief of that agency to the bar to be admonished by the Speaker. But, you know, Liberals make sure they help their own. That member, after being admonished by this House, was shuffled off and given a high-paying job with another agency. So that's how accountability works with this government. We have another election. We get these guys squeak their way back in, and no sooner does that happen than we have the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and in part of its toward the tail end of the pandemic, they trot out this ArriveCan app, an application that didn't work, that sent thousands of Canadians to quarantine unnecessarily and in error. We find out that there were a couple of middlemen that made off with millions of dollars, and when the parliamentary investigation into this revealed this, again, members that come, then the Liberal insiders that are getting rich out of this refused to answer questions, or had to be brought to the bar again. These are unprecedented steps that hadn't been resorted to in decades, but under the level of corruption of this government and the necessity to obtain information to get to the bottom of scandal after scandal after scandal leads us to where we are today. I don't know how much time I've got left, Mr. Speaker. We're just... all right, good. Okay, a couple of minutes. All right. Well, today we now are to the point where we have the latest, and I'm going to end up having to get deeper into this when we resume. But the current SDCTC crisis, where we have $400 million that have gone out into the pockets of Liberal insiders, and questions that remain unanswered, documents that, again, have been ordered by this House. The House voted for the production of these documents. This isn't something Conservatives have just dreamed up. This is the House of Commons, where the Conservatives have but 119 seats by my, I think, last count. 121. What are we up to? 121. We in this Parliament. Anyway, the point is that we don't have enough votes to do this just as an act of partisanship, Mr. Speaker. This is what the majority of the House of Commons, including members of all parties, except for the Liberals over there, who in furtherance of their culture of secrecy continue to withhold documents. Right. So we are seized with this, and they would say, well, boy, if the Conservatives would just kick this over to committee, and then we can carry on with the business of this government. But we don't, Mr. Speaker, Canadians want a carbon tax election. That's what we want. We need to settle the issue of getting the documents now, and we can then move to other matters.
Having reached, I thank the honourable member for drawing to a close of his comment. Having reached the expiry of the time provided for today's debate, the House will resume consideration on the privilege motion at 11 a.m. on Monday, October 21st, 2024. Pursuant to Standing Order 94, I wish to inform honourable members that private members' business will be suspended on that day. It being 2:30, the House stands adjourned until Monday, October 21st at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Orders 28.2 and 24.1. Encore une fois, j'aimerais souhaiter à tous.
Once again, I would like to wish everyone happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours and to your constituents. Thank you.